Hello, and welcome back to Dev Game Club, a weekly podcast in which two veteran game developers look at games from the past to discuss their relevance and impact today. I'm Brett Duville, and I'm joined as always by my co-host, a man who's telling me I can come for him when the job is done.
Tim Longo.
I have no idea where that is said in Chrono Trigger, but when it was said, I wrote it down.
What? That doesn't ring a bell for me either, as we know from the translation differences. But where?
No idea. I literally had no idea. I went and I was like, I know I wrote something down this time, and yep, got
it definitely
nothing.
Sounds like something that somebody would say.
It does, yes. It's a very.
What was it again? Say it again.
A man who's I can come for him when the job is done, or you can come for me when the job is done, I think is what the person said.
Oh, wow. Very melodramatic. I like
yeah. Yeah. But yeah, I don't remember. This is our fifth episode on this game because we ended up extending it when we hit that fated hour and discovered that there was all kinds of side content that we wanted to explore before we barreled through and dealt with Lavos. So we will probably talk about those. I don't know whether you want to do that first or talk about the structure. I should say my theory was roughly correct, that it was who I had in my party that was the most important thing in solving the desert problem. I just didn't know where to go, though I did find it eventually.
Right. Yeah, of course it's Robo. Right?
Yeah. You gotta have Bobo, so that you can have him reforest the place. I actually tried to solve, so I guess we'll just dive into that side content stuff.
Yeah. Let's just start. I mean, I think it's maybe any of the subtopics we have, we can potentially just
they'll come in when we're talking. Yeah. Having figured that out, I actually wanted to do that again with Robo, with the Sunstone. But you don't. It's not like a player choice. It's just the choice is to have him in your party. Although that did make me more aware that certain quests may have to be dealt with in that way.
Yeah, it happens. There'll be some other cases we'll talk about.
I was wondering. So that is a really great scene when you go and you find Robo, who is now covered with dust and sitting in a pool of light in a. Oh my God! Kind of sanctuary. That is a great moment, and so is the ensuing sitting around the campfire scene. Yeah, why don't you tell it, because I know how much it meant to you.
Well, before, to step back for a second, before that even, as your stream had predicted, I think you mentioned last episode when you'd gotten to that point about they predicted what my experience would be. And I've been such a Robo fan the whole time. So there was sort of like an immediate gratification of having him in my party and kind of, a standard party member for me, because immediately Fiona mentions this, and then I forget exactly the sequence because it was a couple episodes for me, but immediately somebody, either Robo or Fiona, pipes up. I think Robo volunteers, right? He says,
yes, he basically says, yeah, I
am the only one who can do that, And so not only does it launch into that right away, and you kind of you're like, oh, that's so cool. And in my case, I was already set up for it. Not that it's difficult to switch party members, but I already had a commitment to Robo. So it felt like a kind of a cool, unexpected reward in a way, even though everyone gets the same result. But then when you go outside of the temple or her house, you see Robo working, working the desert. He turns they have specialized graphics.
A world map sprite.
Animations.
Additional sprites for him. Yeah.
He turns into a tractor, and then he's seeding the desert.
He's got a bandana over his mouth.
Oh my God.
For some reason.
It's amazing.
Or maybe on his head, I can't remember, but yeah, to keep the sun off, I guess, off of his dome.
He's working hard. It's and it's just that kind of attention to detail and love that they put into this game is just a great example of that. Because you just immediately see that. As a quick aside, which you probably would have seen accidentally if you go back to, let's see, what time period? I guess it's 600, right? If you go back
600 is where he becomes, the keeper of the forest. Yeah.
Yeah, so it is possible to have, he's still working, and it's still possible to have him working in the desert and then have Robo with you in your party.
Yes, I did see that because I then recovered him. And the reason was actually that ties into the Sunstone. So I'll just quickly diverge to that. Mm-hmm. Because I had him do that, I also wanted him from 600 on to keep an eye on the Sunstone because it disappears between 600 and 1,000. I thought, I'll go in there with him and just see if he'll also watch that and make sure nobody takes it. But
got it.
It doesn't do anything.
That's a cool theory, though.
Yeah, I mean, it's reasonable. Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's not, that's why I kind of pointed out, it's not really a player verb that you can sort of deploy Robo that way. It's a story consequence, and they didn't consider that thing. Anyway, yeah.
Yeah, and in the Sunstone, they clearly wanted you to go find it. Which, we'll get into that in a second too. But yeah, then you obviously because you have the wings of time, you can immediately go into the future and see the result of Robo's 400 years of tilling and planting and watering. But so in the future, once the forest is there, then Fiona's temple, I think it's called
shrine,
right, is there. And there's actually sort of like priestesses there, and or somebody who's worshiping sort of the situation, the druids or something like that. And you walk in there, and then it's so beautifully presented where you're like, okay, I just went into the future, I left him there for 400 years, I can instantly go into the future and see what happened. And so no time has passed for you, of course, and you're walking down the aisle, and you go up, and he's sitting there basking in sunlight, and he's kind of slumped over, but he's clearly, been put on literally a pedestal and sort of, worshipped or in a place of honor for all of his work, and you're like, I want Robo back. And then you talk to him, and he wakes up, and you kind of talk. I don't remember exactly the voice or the dialogue there. He joins your party, and he says, he even admits that it's only been probably moments for you, but for me, it's been 400 years and so much has happened. And then what's I think left there is the sapling. I don't remember the transition to the forest scene though, but eventually how do you get to the forest scene?
I think he says something like, I have a theory I want to talk over with you.
Yeah, he says something like that.
And it goes straight to it, right? He goes, I had a lot of time to think, and I have something I want to talk about with you, something along those lines.
Oh, he's such a cool character. Yeah. And then, yeah.
And so he basically, he suggests, and one of the things I was really surprised about in this scene was, this is a scene that's optional, but seems kind of critical to one of at least the themes of the game. And that's that the Earth is its own sort of entity. It's sort of a Gaia hypothesis embedded in the game, that the Earth is its own. The Earth, is its own entity. That it is having these memories in some sense. That we are trying to repair its story.
I forgot about that. Yep.
Right, and so that's what they kind of talk about around the fire. Is that's what he's been thinking about, and of course he's been spending all this time taking care of the ecology, that it makes a certain amount of the environment, that it makes a certain amount of sense that he would kind of come to that conclusion, which is a really interesting spin on the game that is entirely optional and not something you would pick up on or would be mentioned otherwise. So I thought that was really, I don't know, not uncool. I thought that was kind of neat, but also like I feel badly for people who might have missed that. So, because it seems kind of important to the overall themes. It seems like an important theme, I should say, that you just maybe wouldn't get otherwise.
Well, I mean, we talk about this from time to time with other games too. It's the double-edged sword of that stuff that, for people who get it, it's that much more rewarding, right?
Yeah.
And then those who don't, either don't know that they missed it, or when they find out about it, they may be bummed, but also kind of impressed maybe that the game has that option.
Right.
And there's stuff that we probably, maybe at this point, small things that both of us missed or one of us missed or something like that. Because it sounds like we kind of scoured pretty much everything, all the big things. But still,
yeah, I wondered if you saved Lucca's mom.
I did, yeah. So that's why I was leading to that too, because that happens in that forest scene as well, right?
Right.
For me, it did at least. I don't know if there's another way to do it, but I don't remember again the sequence of events of why it happens. But
Lucca wakes. Everybody's asleep, and Lucca wakes up,
and she wakes up
at the campfire and goes to the. You control her and walk her to the adjoining screen where there's a gate, which takes her back to a memory we didn't know she had. And I'm not certain, to be honest, that I had gone into her mother's room and seen her sitting by the window. So it didn't entirely land for me because I didn't know what was going on. I didn't know why I was being shown this, but I mean, you quickly get the sense that, oh, this was a really important day in Lucca's life, and she's getting to see it, which is also kind of a wild, I mean, that's a time travel trope, right? That's a thing that you would want. That's a wish fulfillment thing. Like if you could only go back and be at that one day when everything changed, right? You know, I don't know that we all have something quite that memorable in our lives, but you definitely see the impact that would have.
Yeah, and I think doesn't Robo say something to everybody, or it somehow comes up in conversation that that everybody does have like, how does it? Somebody, again, it was 2 weeks ago for me, so I don't remember. My notes and for that episode don't include it.
He talks about how like, your life flashes before your eyes.
Oh, that's right.
Right,
yes.
That you have your memories of the big events in your life, and that we might be experiencing that for this entity, this other entity that he's talking about, that he's kind of grasping to understand. So it's kind of his philosophical bent, right? And then, that pair, I hadn't thought about it in those terms, but that pairs really nicely with one of them getting a chance to go back and have that moment.
Yeah, I was actually surprised that more of them wouldn't in that sequence, but basically that concept is sort of spread in a way throughout each of the characters for different quests that you do, right, separately. There's not all in the forest scene, but that essentially was Lucca's. I don't think she has another sort of character quest. I'd love to hear if I'm wrong on that from your perspective, because I think you had her with you more of the time, more often.
No, I don't think she really does. I will say as an aside, this was another time where I knew exactly what to do and found it entirely frustrating to do it. I must have tried this 15 times to save her, because I worked out what the password was in my head. I didn't even find the piece of paper, although I found it later. That you spell her name with the controller. I noticed her name was Lara, and I went, oh, of course, that's going to be the password to the machine.
Yeah.
So apparently on the SNES version, when it would say enter password on the screen, you were supposed to press A and then wait until that went away and then press LARA. But I would see enter password on the screen, I'd press LARA. So the first A there would be what would put the enter password down, and then it would immediately fail, because then my first actual letter that the game was listening to was R.
No.
And I must have done it a dozen times that way and been like, what am I doing wrong? And then somebody in the chat said, well, this is a little confusing. Because I did find that, after a couple times, I'm like, okay, maybe this isn't the right password. I thought that was pretty inspired of me to come up with that. And I went and looked around, and then it was like, no, it's my wife's name. I'm like, are you kidding me? What am I doing? And done it. And then I had just I don't know how many times I must have tried that, but so it's just another thing where it's like, oh, the idea is so great.
Yeah,
it's terrific. And then just not quite there in implementation, whether some of that is due to translation limitations, all of that stuff was eliminated for you. And just some wonkiness with how it was communicating with you, what you were supposed to do, was not great. So, but
I
cool idea.
That issue. I think I did on the first try. So something else. Yeah, I'm not sure I'm fully understanding what the issue was exactly, but I understand how the inputs.
Yeah,
were
you had
confusing.
basically had to press A to dismiss the request to enter the password and then enter the password.
Right. So yeah, it's like a usability issue.
Yeah, just a usability issue. Now, if it had been like B to put down stuff on the screen, it wouldn't have been a problem, right? It was kind of an overloading of the A button in that case of being part of the password, and it was just.
I just thought that whole forest sequence was very touching, and it was like a moment of calm. And to be honest, like at that point in the game, I feel like as a group, the group had never really, other than kind of the end of time sequences, but that's like not even really that's just like a crossroads or something. It's like a hub. It's not really a hangout point. And this was like the first time where everyone kind of could just have a moment of not fighting and not looking for something, and
it's
like
my rifle, my pony, and me.
Yeah. And it was philosophical, right? And of course, because I'm such a Robo fan, it was sort of like initiated from events that Robo had gone through. And he was asking, and I think that's a great theme for him in general throughout the whole game, especially toward the end of the game, as we'll talk about probably some other sequences with him where he is, is quote unquote evolving, which is a robot trope, an AI trope, and how he's changed over time too. But to have him initiate that, and then I think though I didn't really see it much because I didn't have Lucca with me most of the time, but clearly by the end of the game, with like the ending sequences and ending cinematics and stuff, there was supposed to be a sort of like connection between he and Lucca,
right?
And so, in retrospect, it's even more touching that she had her sort of like memory moment via that sequence as well in the forest, because they sort of have a connection, because she's the one that fixed him and found him, and and she's the robot master kind of stuff. And then there's a cute little sequence in the anime ending that you will not have seen, where she just to jump ahead, I won't dwell on it because you didn't see it, but she builds a little mini robot that looks like him. Mm-hmm. in the anime sequence. And so the very last scene you see is her kind of walking through the forest with this little baby Robo. It's so cute. Right. So anyway,
you get the sense actually from earlier in the game that she might be sort of even the progenitor of robotics in this world, because she built the Gato Roboto that you fight, the karaoke robot at the fair, because she's such an inventor. Yeah, it's an
everyone has their descendants, right? It's like
right, exactly.
And hers are sort of the robots in a way, and the royalty is Marley's and that kind of thing.
Yeah,
and then so anyway, that whole sequence with the forest was great, and and even to unlock that sequence, you had to fight a pretty hard boss, and and that was all optional too, just the way that all ran down. Now I'm trying to think, most of these sequences in the Fated Hour resulted in something valuable that will help you, make you more powerful, to help you beat Lavos. But I don't remember in that case what that would have been.
Robo gives Lucca a special, it's called the Green Dream, I believe, was an accessory.
Oh, yes, that's right.
Yeah. So there is a gameplay benefit, although I never equipped that myself.
I didn't.
But it is another variable.
Yeah. But there's a theme here with all of these sequences in the Fated Hour, where you're basically like collecting the highest powered loot, right? To
absolutely
use or not use, and very rewarding in that way.
Yeah, because you get the rainbow shell. Maybe we should do the sunstone, because that ties into that. That's kind of the other more powerful thing.
Did you do what order did you do those in? Can you do those out of order? Because I did the rainbow first.
I did the rainbow shell first as well, so
okay.
I can't tell you, although I presume you can do them out of order.
Yeah.
Because
oh, yeah,
I think
that's true. I guess
because Melchior would basically say, "Oh, I see you have a sunstone. I could, I don't see why that wouldn't
you
be
could go
possible.
to the future first if you wanted to. Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, I would think so.
Yeah.
The sunstone was a thing that I knew forever I was going to have to do, right? That was the most telegraphed answer, and yet I couldn't actually find the moonstone for the longest time.
I mean, it took me a while.
And it turns out it was helpful to use the map, the in-game map, which overworld map, which I didn't know was there until somebody pointed it out on stream.
Oh, I never used the map.
You never used it at all. So on the select button, whatever that is on the Xbox controller, but the left button in the middle,
okay,
like an option button or whatever. I forget what it is on the on the Xbox controller. I have one here.
Menu maybe. It's the little hamburger, or no, not the hamburger, but the
back.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, but I have an original Xbox controller.
I thought
or an Xbox 360
that,
controller.
Is it just on by default, or you have to dive into the menu?
No. I mean, it just worked for me.
I can't freaking believe that.
Right. So that made it a little easier for me to be able to look at the map and say, "Oh, I haven't been here." Right? It'd be in an era and go, "Oh, I haven't." Yeah, I looked at the map.
Fog of War?
No, it's just purely the map.
Oh.
It's just purely a pulled out version of the map, so you can see the whole thing of the world.
I knew that I needed to find the moonstone, and I figured it would be somewhere like that. And for me, it ended up just being the last thing I did. And also for me, going into the future was the last one that I kind of explored. So once I went there, it wasn't hard to find because I kind of was through process of elimination, knew it was the last thing I needed to do. And that was the last, place. So I figured it was there.
Oh, okay.
But anyway, that's hilarious about the map. I missed that in the manual, I guess.
So I had a hard time finding that. I kind of stumbled upon it just because I was like, oh, I don't know if I've been there. And I kind of drove around and went and found it. But it's another temple with a tough boss. I actually did it last because I had difficulty beating the boss the first time I tried it. The Sunkeeper it's like a ball or something with fireballs around it, but it randomizes the fireballs. And I didn't take that clue.
It took me a while. Yeah. It's called
the first time.
In my case, it's something roulette. Is the name of the spell.
Yeah. Sun roulette or something like that. Yeah. Flame roulette maybe. And so it spins them around, and I just did not track why it would do that.
Right.
But so on Saturday or something, I had seen that and given up on it. Did it a couple times. I was like, I'm just not powerful enough for this. And went away, and it ended up being the last thing I did because it was the one thing I hadn't done yet, and went, oh, okay, I guess I'll go back to that and try to figure that out. And I actually really like that as a boss idea. Kind of sets you up a little bit for Lavos, in a sense, because it's the target is unexpected, right? You need to find the right flame target around that thing to defeat it, to get rid of those flames that surround it so that you can actually get at the core. I thought that was a really, really neat idea for a boss. And I ended up being like, okay, I gotta kind of go around counterclockwise around the thing and try to find how many times did I press? And I had two characters trying to find that thing, and then a third character healing. But it was a good boss fight. Cool idea.
Yeah.
And in the end, you just get the moonstone, right? It's not like there's a big dungeon there, but I still enjoyed it.
Right. Yeah. In that case, I had the. So what was your understanding of the way that the mechanics of that work, though? So for me, when you hit the right one, it does damage to the center.
Right. Yes. That's right. That's what it did. Yeah.
Audio cue. Right. And then eventually, I guess you do enough damage where it takes
where it kills it
down. Yeah.
Yeah. Something like that, yeah.
And I had once I'd figured it out, I kind of I ended up doing what I usually do and just kind of brute forced through it because Chrono had the red armor on. because I knew it was a fire battle.
The ruby vest, yeah.
Well, the ruby, I had ruby on Frog and on both Frog and Robo, but Chrono had the red on, which is slightly different, and that is absorbs fire damage, so it actually heals you.
Okay.
So
right.
both Frog and Robo had gone down, and I just didn't bother bringing them back up. So he was just being healed the whole time. So I just used him. So it took me way longer than I should, because I didn't have three characters. I didn't have 3 characters looking for the right flame. I was just kind of, lucking out. So it was kind of a silly way to go about it, but it was cool to just be indestructible essentially, because
that's funny. That's another way to do it.
healing me with their fire attacks. So that was kind of fun, and eventually I didn't sell any of that armor. I kept all of the elemental based armor just in case, though that's the only one I really used, to be honest, because all of it had absorption abilities for each type, whatever, white, blue, black, red. And I guess that was all of them. So then, you get the moonstone. And then of course, at this point, like you said, it's been telegraphed so much, and we've been to the sun cave, sun keep. Yep. No, the cave where you put it.
Right. I think it was called the Sun Keep.
Oh, okay. It was different for me. I think it was called the Sun Shrine for me, or something like that. Anyway. Okay. But so we knew we needed to put it there, and also people have been telegraphing it the whole time that it takes generations.
Eons, yeah.
In fact, for me, someone had even said, I think it takes about 65 million years. I was like,
okay.
Clear as mud.
Clear direction there, yeah.
So then we go put it into that cave that I've been into a million times, finally with the thing, turning the moonstone into the sunstone.
Right.
But then it does get stolen.
It gets stolen. So you go all the way to I put it in there. I'm like, cool, I'll just go to 2300 and I'll go get it. And they show up in 2300 and it's not there. And you're like, dang it, what is going on? So I almost went back to 1999, but I went back to 1000 and it's not there. And then I went back to 600, and that's when I put Robo there and was like, oh, well, clearly Robo will just guard, but Robo didn't happen. Yeah, so I ended up, I mean, I thought it'd be, I get not pulling the same trick out of the hat twice, since it's a narrative thing more than anything else, but it was still my thought. So then I went to 1000, and this was another reason why this was the last thing I did, because I think I did part of this first, like I did the getting the moonstone and putting it there, and then did one other thing, and in 600 maybe, and discovered no, I don't even know now. I'm trying to figure that out. No, so you have to go back and forth to 1000 a lot to get the tools and everything for a different thing,
for the ruins.
And that's when for the ruins, and so I just kind of discovered the sparkling building and went, oh, I see there's something different here in Poré today, and went in there. And this is when one of the themes of the game kind of came through most strongly for me. Finally all kind of came together. There's the mayor of the town there. If you've visited his house before this, or even at this point, the kids hate him because he's so stingy, and all he cares about is money. He's a miser. And I even said, I think the first time I went in there ages ago, like in the first or second stream of this game, said, oh, that's kind of sad. These kids hate their dad. Yeah. And remarked on that. And and even I think the wife says something, and then there's a kid upstairs who doesn't really understand, like, why do people hate my dad? Fix that, to get to the stone.
The wife says something specific, though, right?
What does she say? I don't. She
says, I could really use some jerk. Oh no,
no,
not there.
That's the wife in the past.
Yeah.
So if you go back to 600,
great
generations, before, that's the woman who wants the jerky.
Yeah.
And I think the first time I went, I think I actually brought her jerky twice. And I think the first time I sold it to her.
Yeah.
And
You
then
made
coming
$100.
back, and it made nothing. So now I'm not sure, because I ended up reloading a whole bunch at one point, and I'm like, maybe I just didn't. I don't know what happened. But I ended up refinding the jerky guy and buying it and bringing it to her and being like, I'll just give it to you. I've got, at this point I had 150,000 gil or something. And that's what triggers a whole change in the lineage of these people to be more generous.
Yeah.
Which
brilliant.
Over the course of 400 years, yeah, it's a great idea. It's also a little bit of a stretch. I don't know how much of that, but it does specifically speak to one of the themes. We've talked about sort of the consequences of your actions and things like that, but so many descendant characters in this game specifically have sort of the sins of the father or the virtues of the father visited on the sons, as it were. You've got Yakra and Yakra the 13th, which are the insects, the one that takes over the chancellor or kidnaps the queen.
Ozzy.
You've got Ozzy returning with Ozzy the 8th in Medina. I think originally he's sort of the mayor of the place, and then he ends up being a servant in the home. That's just kind of a funny one that they play.
Mm-hmm.
There's the guys with the tools, like they're both like drinkers and stuff like that. The mayor being generous versus not. There's sort of these inherent characteristics that grow out of your changes, which I just thought was, you could also say Lucca's mom, but that's a sort of very different, very specific case.
Yeah. Well, and I think the other part of it for me that I love is the quest items that you need to usually solve those are coming from a different time as well, right? The jerky you have to get from, I think, 1,000 to bring it back to 600 and stuff like that. So, and in my case, and this is a sort of like, this is related to one of my themes I'll get to later, is because it definitely, the Fated Hour is the best personification of this sort of structural aspect of allowing the player to do things in various orders, which is a commonplace thing in games today. But even earlier, it's dawning on me that even though I'd been longing for something like the Fated Hour, which maybe I can talk about the structural stuff that I want to talk about in a second, now that it's organically come up. But even though the Fated Hour is the best sort of example of that, throughout the game there have been multiple smaller examples of that. And the reason I bring it up here is I had done the jerky thing a long time ago. And had realized the repercussions of that decision. I did not sell it to her originally. I chose to, as I had plenty of money anyway, and that's a kind of a common
thing,
thing where they're like, well, do you want all this money or do you want to do the good thing, and so I always pick the thing that and so I gave her the jerky. This was like maybe 2 sessions ago. Because once I'd found that those two go together, I wanted to do them to see if anything happened. And then it had gone into the future at some point, and I didn't have the ship at that point. So it was a while later that I went back to visit that house. And then I realized that the family was different. And I was like, oh, neat. And to me, I thought that was the end of it. You know what I mean? Because I thought, okay, I did this jerky thing.
Your generosity was its own reward.
Exactly. I had imposed upon this quest that it was just like you said, a thematic example of what the game is trying to say from time to time. And it was just this little bonus. But then it turns out the last big quest that I did, also, I had just by happenstance found the sparkly house. And I was like, oh, that's weird. I've never seen that in the overworld map before. So I go over there. I was like, oh yeah, this is the place where, the miser was or whatever. And so there wasn't a lock and key for me because I already had unlocked it. You know what I mean? So I got there. Yeah. And so to me, I was like, oh, this is just where the moonstone is. That's weird. And then later dawned on me, oh, I think if I hadn't done the jerky already, then it would have been different.
Right. Yeah.
But I think it's a testament to the structure of the game where, like we said, there's pros and cons of doing things that are not so obvious in a certain order. But because I did it so long ago, it obviously felt like I had much more agency. And once the Sunstone stuff is resolved, it makes me feel a little more clever because I did it early. You know what I mean? It's like, oh, I found this thing that ended up paying off in the end. So I don't know. It was kind of an interesting little difference there between the two of our playthroughs.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, we should also probably talk a little bit now about the time it takes to get to this point where the game is open in this way, where you can do these things out of order. I mean, I think we mostly did all these side quests in roughly the same order, aside from some of these other particularities. But mostly, sort of generally, I didn't do a lot of side stuff. I thought I had done that jerky thing or even bought the jerky, but I guess I hadn't. Who knows? But you had said last time, I don't know if it was, I think it might have been in pre-show last time, about your concern about the time it takes to get to this part where it opens the game, where it's basically the next to last chapter, and finally you can go around and do all these different sorts of time related things. You want to elaborate on that?
Yeah. So
because I want to argue with you.
Well, no, and I actually want to argue with myself because I think depending on the goals of the game, one thing that I'm realizing with, like, you had told me stories about Final Fantasy 13 specifically, and I don't know if it was 2 or 3 or however, whichever sequel to 13 it was, but I think it was actually 13, the first one, where it has a similar thing where, and I remember when it came out, people kind of notoriously talking about how many, 100 hours before you get to sort of like the equivalent.
Yeah, no, it's a great game once you're about 40 hours in, right?
Yeah, exactly. So I hear that so much, and I think it's become sort of like a, it's become a meme for me in a way, because so many people say, oh yeah, you just got to play to this point. And so, as somebody who is a huge fan of, say, like The Witcher 3 or, Breath of the Wild or something that is an opposite structure, but that, I think one thing that Chrono Trigger has changed my mind on, so I don't, maybe this argument won't be that big after all, is that there is a time when there's a time to do sort of the Witcher 3 structure, which is just a typical kind of open structure, with, essentially with sort of chapters and lands that you're unlocking over time. So it's not fully open, but it becomes more open over time. Or the GTA 3 is the better example, because we've played that in the podcast, where you have the islands opening up. So you think it's open and then it keeps getting more open. But with Chrono Trigger, I think the thing that I've come around on, even though early in the series I was complaining, where I've heard with this game, there's some sections where it really opens up and I can't wait to do that. And then was kind of disappointed, I think, in the first couple episodes where it felt basically linear for the most part, with the exception of these few little things like the jerky or whatever. And over time, by the time I finish, what I've realized is that for the Fated Hour to have the highest impact that it has had on me as a player, I think the way the structure of the game opens up with for the first 20 hours or whatever is actually critical for that Fated Hour to land better. And that's really the point I wanted to make with the structure, because it has been sort of like a player's mental arc for me playing this game over the series, because I had started out in this sort of negative space of like, of not looking forward to a lot of just, okay, go here, go here, go here. But when the Fated Hour opens up, you have a familiarity with all of the places you've been, because they've forced you through the linear tunnel version, and you have a bigger sense of freedom, because, now that you have this ship that literally can fly anywhere, you can go and explore and experiment is even a better word for me, because there's so many different sort of interactions that happen with things that you can do with this section. And almost all of it is optional anyway. So I think probably if I were to go back, maybe the sections leading up to the Fated Hour probably were a little bit long, but I still think they're critical structurally for that to be a thing. So maybe that's where the JRPG trope has come from, especially with Square games. I think that when it comes, I do want to hear your argument for something like 13 when it comes to such a long commitment, because I don't think that's, I mean, I feel like there's many modern examples where that's...
I mean, it would be hard for me to justify 13 because 13 is even more linear than this. Because you can get up, you can go and explore, you can go different times through the gates and things like that. There are opportunities. They don't pay off much, but you can do that in this game. And in fact, you complained that you could do it at one point.
Well, and and with a couple sections, I think that it was detrimental to actually do it. In my opinion.
Because there's nothing there, so why be able to go there? I totally agree with that. Yeah. Final Fantasy 13's, for not to spend too much time on it, but it spends literally like 40 hours of straight hallway. I mean, effectively. I mean, the spaces might not look like hallways, but in terms of topology, you are walking down a hallway for 40 hours and fighting things along the way and getting story bits and all that stuff, but you're not making any decisions about that. Yeah. And then at some point, it just sends you down to this new location where it's like, okay, now it's like an open world. And you're like, what have I been doing for 40 hours? Like, this is the game. You know, not that, you know, there are certainly games that have that, but for an RPG, it felt really, really strange. I want to contrast this with Wasteland 2, which is the other game I've been playing.
Oh, that's right. Actually, I forgot that.
I've been playing these games at the same time, and kind of glad. And The Witcher 3 is another good example to bring into that discussion. So Wasteland 2 is very open from the start. And that can be really, really disorienting because I've actually had people ask me on the stream, you know, what's the plot now that I'm 30 hours in. I'd have to look at my Steam played, but I'm significantly into this game. And I can't really give you one. Like, you know, I'm a ranger and I was going to look into this one ranger's death, and then all these other things happened. And I don't know which ones of those things are sort of part of the plot. And I don't think it's not an achievement or anything like that, but I don't think that the game supports well. One of the things The Witcher 3 does well is support you wanting to pursue one storyline to the end, right? It gives you the breadcrumbs or whatever to go where you need to go, to advance the quest line or something like that, which has its own pluses and minuses. But it does at least allow a sort of narrative cohesion to each of those things. Whereas I will open the quest journal from time to time because I don't know what I should do next. In Wasteland 2, and just look at this long list of things that I have open and go, which thread do I pull on? If I wanted to kind of race to the end of the game, I would have no idea which of those things I should do. It's trying to do something differently in that it is trying basically to make all of your decisions matter and lead to many, many multiple possible endings, sort of in the Fallout mode. The original Fallout mode, another game we've played. But I think that's a little bit at the expense of narrative cohesion, first of all. And second of all, I'm not probably going to play it again. It's too long for that. So I'm not sure that that's beneficial to me. And I also don't know when I'm making those decisions that have those things fork. You know what I mean? There's some times where it's like I don't do a quest, so I know that obviously changes the game in some way. But there's not a lot of times where I go, oh, obviously this is going to make a big difference in the world, or what that difference will be. So I can be very lost. So I don't know. These games are all of these games are trying different things and are trying to deliver different things. But if you're trying to write a story game, as many JRPGs are, I think pushing the opening up of the game and widening it out is a good plan, because then you actually have a good sense of what the goals are. And this other stuff is sort of ancillary to the goal. I can return to that goal at any time. And you haven't kind of lost what the main goal is. I see it. No, and I think that's a good argument. You said it there at the end there too, that I want to reinforce is it really does come down to what goals the game has. Yeah,
and what they're trying to do. And whenever
absolutely.
I mean, I'm sure we've talked about this many times on the podcast and other series, but and I think this is probably a very obvious statement for any video game player who plays a fair number of games. Any goal you pick is going to be at a sacrifice of another goal. You can't
Yep.
do
Yeah.
all the goals. And so if you're going to make a Witcher style game, and I agree with you that they do have kind of, from a usability standpoint and understanding standpoint, they do a pretty good job at keeping the threads clear if you want to pursue certain threads. But because of the structure of that game, being a huge Witcher fan and being somebody who has played every Witcher game, and played them in a row, you can contrast something like Witcher 2, which was largely a linear game with some sort of hubs and spoke kind of stuff. It wasn't open world like 3 is in the same way. And that was a much more cohesive plot. So if somebody asked me what the plot was, like in your example, a lot easier to do. And when somebody asks you from for say, I don't know, Breath of the Wild or Witcher 3, what the plot is, you can maybe say what the overall plot of Witcher 3 is from like a motivation standpoint for what Geralt is doing. But largely the answer, I think most of the time from a goal perspective, the developers want you to say when somebody asks you that, they want the plot to be your plot, right? They want the plot to be what happened to you because you chose to focus on the Bloody Baron's quest, and that's like your main thing. And so you're going to talk a lot about that quest. And it's an amazing quest, but somebody else may not have done it at all. I think in that case, you actually have to do some of it because it's tied into the main quest. But do you know what I mean? It's like, it's just a different outcome. And to your point about Wasteland 2, like replayability, I think there's maybe speaking from a developer standpoint, I feel like there's a sub goal of potentially having people being able to play it again. But largely, I think it does come back to not about replaying it, but it's just like
or feeling like your choices mattered, right? Yeah, I mean, I get that for sure. Alpha Protocol is another game that I've played. I didn't finish it because it had a difficulty spike I couldn't climb over, or was not significantly invested enough in the game to climb over. But it is a game that has been said to be like one of those games that you should just make everything about the game as easy as possible and just play it again and again and again to play it in any weird way. People have said you can play it in like 3 hours if you just turn down the combat to super easy. Just to see all what kind of crazy things your decisions will result in, which is an interesting choice, right? I mean, that was sort of the goal behind LMNO, that Spielberg inspired game that they worked on at EALA. God,
yeah,
12, 13 years ago, whatever. It was quite a while ago. That was canceled. But if I will see if I can find it. There was a good oral history of that game. Maybe I don't know, 7, 8 years ago, that kind of talks about what their goals were. And it was like, this was meant to be a 3-hour game, 3 days of story that you played a number of times, to find all the ways it could change, almost like a David Cage game for that matter.
Doug Church was, I think, on that game. And
Doug Church was, yes.
Somebody who we've had on the podcast actually was also on that game. Randy Smith.
Yeah, Randy Smith was on that game,
yeah. And their legacy, as we've talked a lot about, comes from Looking Glass games and such. So you can see that being their bread and butter.
Yeah, huge player agency advocates. Yeah.
So it just comes down to goals. And like you said, I think clearly, as I'm understanding, the JRPG formula, though maybe that's overstating it, has at least the ones we played on the podcast, obviously has a thrust toward plot and wants that to be a priority. And so, but they're also making an RPG, right? And they also want some player agency. So I've become convinced that there is, that I think my goals for coming into the game were incompatible with what the actual goals were. And now that I've finished, just to reinforce the point I started with, I think the Faded Hour had a bigger impact on me because of the first half of the game. You know what I mean? Because I had built the relationship in a linear way with the rest of the world, and it makes that openness even more valuable. Like in GTA 3, when we played it, right, you start in an open world. So it's sort of like the sort of splendor of that is, it's not that it's wasted early, it's just used early. Breath of the Wild is another interesting example because the plot basically is never going to change. And largely because of the way, if you choose to play the way they sort of traditionally want you to play, you're going to do everything that they kind of want you to do. It's just you're doing it in the order you want, but you're going to hit every beast. You're going to hit, you're going to do the castle at the end. So it's like, it's an even slightly, it's an even more different version of the Witcher 3 structure, because Witcher 3 actually does have a plot, and you actually, Geralt has a character motivation, et cetera, et cetera. So
right. Yeah, it's trying to thread the needle a different way for sure. Yeah, JRPGs are often about character and plot, and so there's less about player agency over those things, and more about strategy instead. Right. And I think this game leans into that with the sort of character stuff that we've talked about, party makeup and things. So
for sure.
Let's talk about the last couple. That was a good digression. Let's talk about the last couple quests. There are only a couple left. One was the Ghost of a Lofty Knight, slain by Janus in the Middle Ages, which is having the frog or Glenn go and find and put to rest Cyrus, which is that's that I mentioned earlier, is the tools tools using character. There's a carpenter or something with a bunch of underlings who will repair the disintegrating castle, the northern ruin, if you can just get tools for him because somebody stole them, and then you go into the future, you get the tools, you bring them back, and you sort of, that one's a little fetch questy because you basically have to go in, fight some monsters. They come in, they fix some stuff, and then they say, oh, there's more monsters, and they go away, and you fight some more monsters, and then you go get them again, and it's like you're progressively opening up this castle by going back and forth to town to get the carpenters. But in the end, you do get to rescue or to free Cyrus's ghost, who will fight you if he can't remember who he is or something, if you approach him earlier, which was an interesting thing, and he can't be defeated in that form. So that was kind of weird.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I always appreciate in time related games like this where you see the ruins and you're like, oh, clearly this needs to be fixed somehow. And I maybe like couldn't figure out what to do next, and so I paused. Like I'd met Cyrus the ghost in 600 and didn't know what to do, and then so I maybe did some other stuff and then came back to it. So it was a little bit more removed. The steps were removed from each other for me, so it didn't feel as fetch questy. But I love getting the quest item from a different time, using it in this time. I love that you kind of are rebuilding that. Once you finish rebuilding it and you do, let his spirit rest, they changed the location name to something like the Hero's Shrine or something like that from the ruins. Huh. So when you go back to it, which if you do, you get like a speed capsule or something if you go back to the grave. So there's nothing really new there other than that. But it was cool to just see that that you've basically rehabilitated this shrine to Cyrus that was so important to Glenn. So not quite on the level of the Robo stuff for me, but of course, because Glenn was also Glenn was my number 2.
Right.
And if I can play a whole game where you're just playing as the frog, and forget Crono, I don't really care about Crono at all, to be honest. Then that would be my favorite. But so, and I
send your mails to hatemail@devgameclub.com.
No, Crono's just a cipher, right? Like I don't know. I feel like my memory of Final Fantasy IX that I had more going on with that character than this one.
Right. Yeah.
But it's a later game, so maybe that's unfair. But But yeah, just that scene at the gravesite, and with Glenn and Cyrus and kind of that closure, I thought was really cool. But yeah, not quite as crazy as the Robo sequence stuff. Although we haven't even hit one of the other.
Yeah, the other Robo sequence. So we should go to that. That's the last thing I have on my list, I think, of quests, is that there's a task to be done in the future where machinery originated, is how the task read in my game. And that's finding something called the Genodome in 2300 and learning about the origins of Robo in or Prometheus with Atropos there besides. Mm-hmm. Robo should have been a fire mage, clearly, but I guess he stole fire and gave it to Lucca. Maybe that's it. Because she's the fire mage.
Nice.
Yeah, but yeah, we learn a little bit of Robo. He remembers a little bit of himself. It's a dungeon. It's actually a fairly complex dungeon.
Yeah.
There's an interesting puzzle where you have to get a couple devices or a couple sheep, basically, dolls, I think they're called, and place them so that you can get to the mother brain who controls the facility, and who is replacing humanity with robots at this point. There's even a scene where you see a human passing by on a conveyor belt, one of the raggedy people from the future.
Yeah, and turns them into a sparkle.
Turns them into it. Yeah. And you the mechanical thing I thought was neat was there was a spot where you basically electrify Robo and he can power doors, so you can open up things. That was awesome. That was pretty neat. Yeah.
Makes them even better.
One of them was tough to execute. It was pretty far to go, but I got them both, and finally you get to where Robo learns or / remembers that he's Prometheus, maybe the first of these robots, and meets up with a coded as female robot named Atropos, XX. Oh, I didn't even think about that. Atropos X. I don't know if it was XX and XY, if there was gendering in the chromosome letters. I'd have to go back and look. I forget.
His original name had
Y, right?
Yeah, and it was like
so that would be male female, right?
Yeah, maybe. I guess so. Yeah, you're right.
I didn't even catch that while I was playing it. I was just thinking about it now. Oh, that might be chromosomal information.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, you end up fighting her because she's been brainwashed by Mother Brain to support Mother Brain's agenda, and now wants to fight Robo, and Robo faces her alone. So you have a little fight. And then you go kill the Mother Brain. So another, it was a neat side story. Kind of less interested because it's about robots, but that's just me.
Well, it was also your typical sort of AI trying to get rid of the humans because humans can't take care of themselves kind of trope as well.
Yeah.
So a little overdone, but I liked that it gave a little more meat to the bone for Robo's character. And there are some little tongue-in-cheek things, like, for instance, the dolls that you use there to get in, that's the same doll you get from the fair if you do the
those mini games.
Those mini games, right? And shows up in your house.
Right.
So
yeah, I had one of those, yeah.
It seemed like a funny little, like, for whatever reason in the future, robots covet those dolls, that are these little, at least that was my headcanon version. These little artifacts from humanity. So yeah, it wasn't as deep, but there was more going on there. And I did love the fact that
it was a neat dungeon though. So,
yeah. And Robo being a key to the locks, I thought was clever as well. So that was something I didn't see coming.
Yeah.
But then the only little one that I want to mention with the rainbow shell, which was I feel like I remember it being kind of elaborate, but I did like the Toma, was that his name? For me, it was Toma, the explorer.
Toma, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Toma, who'd given you, a hint, and then you got to go into the future to his grave site and pour one out for him on his grave, and then he kind of gives you the hint, and and there's actually, you meet one of his descendants, I think, in the future too.
You do. So I think actually that might be additional or changed for you, because I didn't have to do anything to his grave. I did find his grave, but I didn't have to do anything with it.
Yeah. In the past, he gave me spirits, and I don't know if it probably was optional, but then if you go to the grave and you use the spirits on the grave, you pour it over the grave, and then he kind of comes out as a ghost and says, "Oh yeah, that's where you need to go to get the shell," which in retrospect, I think you can find without that information.
Oh, maybe that's why. Because I may not have spoken to him until after I got the shell.
Oh yeah, I went before. Yeah, because I don't remember why.
So yeah, maybe it was in my version. I just didn't see it because I didn't have to see it.
Yeah, there's a lot of little things like that.
He was actually the other theory I had about the Sunstone, because you go to him. In fact, when I went to him, he said, "Oh, you beat me to the rainbow shell, but I'm going to get the Sunstone first," or something like that. And I went. So when the Sunstone wasn't there, I thought, "Oh,
same." Yeah,
he had it. He took it. It's in his grave, but I couldn't do anything to his grave. So,
same thing. Yeah, I went back to see if I could talk to him again and see if he had stolen it or something. Because he could have stolen it in 600 as well, I think.
Right. He could have. Yeah.
Yeah. So there's just a lot. But I mean, the fact that we're talking about this stuff in this way, right? And we're like, well, was that in our version, or did we? What order did we do things? That's, I think, a testament to the game. In general, sure. Because all these little things. So did you, I mean, we don't want to go too crazy long. We're going to go long, but, there was also the court scene that happened with that, right? Because, so Marley's whole sort of character arc quest, right? With that whole thing where
didn't we talk about that last time?
No, because I hadn't done it yet. You had mentioned the courts.
Yes,
and I was like, but I couldn't get into the court.
You hadn't done it yet. Okay. Because we didn't talk about it. That's right.
Well,
I had done it last time, but I didn't. Yeah.
So the funny thing about that, I said I had found the court, but I couldn't get in.
Yes,
that's
because of because you didn't have her in your party.
I didn't have her in my party. So it dawned on me after the Robo stuff, where I was like, well, I should have whoever's quested is, I should have them in the party for the section of it. And so they let her in. Her father, the king, is being accused of selling off the rainbow shell, which by that point, the rainbow shell's in the castle because you left it there in 600.
Right.
Or at least I did.
You had them bring it to it. Yeah.
Yeah.
You talk to the king and he sends out a whole bunch of people.
Yeah. And of course, the chancellor once again is the villain in this case, and is probably shapeshifted or something. And it ends up being the case. But the only reason I want to talk about this is Marley's entrance back into once you go down into the basement and you fight through and you find the shell, you get a shard for the shell for proof to show that the king did not sell it off. He just didn't know about it because it was hidden in the basement. But for whatever reason, they're trying to get back to the courtroom. They won't let them in, and somebody has the idea to use this side entrance or whatever that ends up just happens to be going back behind the stained glass window in the courtroom.
Yes. Yeah. Uh-huh.
And you're like, wait, all of a sudden there's this secret entrance that we could have used this whole time. And then you're like, okay. And then it fades out and then you see her silhouette behind
the
crawling up.
That's pretty good. Yeah.
Behind the stained glass door. And then she bursts. I was like, they're not going to do this. They're not going to. And then she does. She bursts through it, like, gleefully jumping through, breaking
the big stained glass window. Yeah.
Entrance.
Yeah. Like in Pinocchio or whatever.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Good reference. Yeah. And so anyway, and then of course the king's let off and everybody, you fight the chancellor again, as he shapeshifts. And then if you go back, which you probably did, but if you go back and to the courtroom, you can get the key to that one chest, and you let the
you free the actual chancellor. That was actually the first thing I did this time. That's why I didn't make a note of it, because for me, I had finished the quest the time before. I just hadn't figured out the key.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and then
very good.
Whether you let him out or not has some bearing on some of the endings. I did look up the multiple endings afterwards, which we can talk about maybe later on. But there are a lot of, by the way, I don't know if you looked it up, but
I have not looked them up, and I meant to. I made a note, and I will. But can you tell me some of the good ones? I know that there's one. I did end up reading that book I've been threatening to read, so I'll mention it. It's just called Chrono Trigger. It's from Boss Fight Books, and it's by Michael Williams, who was a person who lived in Japan and taught English there. Not at the time of this game coming out. He was a fairly young child when this game came out, but like in the early aughts and the mid aughts or something like that. So it's just basically a personal essay about the game, but also about Japan. And one of the endings he mentions specifically is a developer ending where you get into there. Yeah. I guess if you use just Marley and Crono to defeat Lavos from basically as soon as you possibly could in the game, in a new game plus, another thing we have to talk about, you get this ending where you go to the end of time and all the developers are represented there.
Yep, as the sprites for the characters and enemies of the game.
Right.
So like, let me see who's who. I have the list here.
Like Toriyama's there, I know. He gives like a weird poem. Sakaguchi's there and complaining about how he's gotten older. He used to be able to stay up all hours, and he can't anymore.
It doesn't mention that they have
interaction. You can talk to them.
Lines,
yeah. They have lines.
Yeah, so that's pretty cool.
Yeah, so there's a bunch of people there. It's pretty neat. There's a lot of different ways this game apparently can end, and I will go and watch them.
You should look it up. It'd be hard for me to summarize, and there's a lot of variations as well, right? Based on doing obviously certain things, like do you save Lucca's mom or not, and what that does to things.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Using the two different telepods at the fair. The two sides do different things that can result in stuff. Oh my goodness. Ending 7, the unknown past. Oh yeah. You're going to have to look it up. There's 13. It looks like there's 13 different endings.
You actually have an additional ending surrounding Magus, which bridges it to Chrono Cross.
Right.
There's a bit that was tacked on. My game basically ends with the kids from the present, from 1000, I should say. So Crono and Lucca and Marley saying goodbye to basically all the characters in the party and having them go off. And actually Crono's mom goes into the time warp as well with his cat.
Which apparently one of the other endings is when she does that, I didn't realize you had control, but you can actually run and follow her into that.
Oh, wow.
Right? Like immediately. And then that's one of the endings.
One of the endings. Interesting.
Like
yeah. And then basically they go, oh, but we have a time machine. And you see them flying through each of the time periods and what happened with the characters. So you see Robo united with Atropos, or Atropos. You see Queen Lean give Frog a kiss on his cheek. I guess there's an ending where he's Glenn, and turns out that he might actually. I think Lean marries Glenn.
There's another
one version.
There's not only the way that you mentioned when you first encounter Magus to turn him back into Glenn, but there's another ending that I can't find where. That happens as well. You can turn him back into Glenn. But then the anime ending also shows Glenn as a human.
Oh, okay. And then, but in addition to all this stuff that happened in the SNES version, you have some sort of, and I didn't quite follow what this was, but it somehow sets up the central conflict of Chrono Cross, which is the PS1 sequel. I mean, a lot of your additional content came in, and including those movies, those FMVs came in with the PS1 version, and that was sort of, Square had moved to the PS1 at that point, famously, because they went, there were Final Fantasy VII, but also Chrono Cross, which came out a bit later, closer to like the end of the PS1 life cycle, as I recall. I don't have a date on that, but it sort of sets that up as like, oh, and but the real bad guy is something else, like I guess. But I didn't follow any of that. It had to do with Magus, I guess.
Yeah, the Dream Devourer.
Oh, right, yes, the Dream Devourer
is actually Lavos,
of course.
Yeah, after having absorbed Schala. Yeah,
right.
So there's cool stuff going on there. So what ends up happening in my New Games Plus, a New Game Plus, is portals open in 3 different places in 12,600 and 1,000, called the Dimensional Vortex. So they actually have a little scene where it shows those opening up. And I think in most cases you can't get to them without the ship. So you see them, but you can't get to them yet if you start over in New Games Plus. And so that's basically a new dungeon. Then if you finish that dungeon, you get this epilogue. It's called Dreams Epilogue.
Okay.
So it's like related to that. Yeah. Yeah, it's crazy. I mean, I don't remember at this era how often multiple endings were a thing in games. I can't think of another good example where something this elaborate was happening, but I feel like it is definitely a thing these days. Depending on like Neo being
and we played Silent Hill 2 has a bunch of different endings as
right,
well.
That's true. Yeah. But yeah, this
and Fallout.
Fallout, true. Yeah, and that was before this, so that was a good example. But anyway, yeah, I was just impressed when I looked at the list of whatever 13, and as far as like ending 1, there's like also 1A through E, depending on what you did.
What are the side quests?
Yeah. So yeah, pretty
cool
impressive list.
Last thing, and then maybe we can do our takeaways. New Game Plus. This is actually the first time. This is the first game in which that term was used.
Oh, is it? Okay.
Even though the behavior had been in other games prior to it, so that you would be able to basically restart the game and keep your gear or whatever. They just didn't call it that. There was no name for that, and this is the name that stuck. And it started with this game, so I thought I'd throw that out there as a
nice.
As an interesting tidbit.
Yeah, I saw the reference on the wiki, but I didn't read it, so it would have probably said that this was the first one. That's cool.
Yep. I'm sure that's it. Let's go right into takeaways, and then we'll take a break and do feedback.
Is there anything that we want to talk about with we didn't talk about the Lavos fight at all?
Oh God, yeah. No, we should probably. Okay, so let's talk about the Lavos fight, and then we will take a break, and then we'll do takeaways after the break. Okay, yeah. We should totally talk about ending. We talked about the ending without actually the final fight. First of all, I was curious if you got through it the first time.
No, so the first time. Oh, you mean the first time this session, or the first time I had mentioned to you that I had gone there early. Is that
right? No, I meant to actually your first attempt to finish the game.
I did finish it first attempt. But I wanted to mention where when I went there early, I got all the way to the point where after he sort of shifts through all the different boss types, and immediately the first spell that he typically or at least it seems like usually cast at that point is a confuse on everybody. And so that's where basically I lost, because all my characters are confused and I couldn't get out of it.
Right.
So, going in the second time, I had the equipment that prevents that from happening. So that was sort of the big difference. I'm sure there are ways around it, but that's, so I did finish I did get through. I mean, the last section was definitely, I was sweating.
It was a nail biter for me too. I was like, uh-oh.
Yeah, I couldn't quite figure out exactly what was happening. I'm not even sure I fully understood what happened after. I mean, I figured out what damage types did what to each of the 3 things, but I don't really know other than killing
the essential thing was that instead of those sort of big big body piece that was in the center being the actual target. The real target is the floating thing on the right.
Yeah, that's what I thought. Okay.
Yeah, that's the kind of weird thing about it. That's the thing you actually have to kill, because if you kill the other two parts, the thing on the right brings them back. So you have to kill the thing on the right. I think the thing on the left does maybe a lot of healing, so I would try to kill that. And once I worked out that the thing on the right was the actual target, I would then start just focusing all my. I would do kind of area effect spells as well, and mostly my triple tech.
Oh, you got one going. So yeah, tell me about that.
Going. I actually finished the game with the 3 kids from 1000. So cool. I brought Marley and Lucca back into the party. They had each gotten, well, Marley never really gets a good weapon. Lucca got a weapon called the Wonder Song, I think, as a gun.
Yeah, you make it with something from side quests.
You make it probably with the Sunstone and the
Yeah, I think Melchior makes it, right?
I think Melchior might make it.
Or no, Lucca maybe makes it with the. Lucca makes it first.
Yeah, Lucca makes it once you get all those materials together. She makes it for herself. But she, that's a weird one because it seems like it's like a wand of wonder in that the damage it does is random.
Oh no!
So it's sometimes extremely high, like higher than Crono's attacks, and then at other times like nothing. It's not like a pure randomness. It's more like there's 5 or 6 lanes, of damage that'll do. And it mostly does, a fair amount. But occasionally it'd be like 12. And you're like, oh. So that was kind of weird.
Did you find the Siren's Kiss?
I did.
Okay. That's not a super good weapon for Marley. Or, I mean, I thought that would have been her, like, best weapon.
Fine, but like a stop or whatever it does would not work on Lavos.
Oh,
and it does do a lot of actual damage. So, it's doing like 250 or whatever, and I mean that's fine. But it was better to just, as much as possible, lean into their triple tech. The name of which I've forgotten, Delta Force, I think. It just does a ton of damage.
This can't be called Delta Force, is it?
It makes a triangle on the screen and does damage.
Okay.
A delta, like the Greek letter.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's not a great name. But yeah, it does that. The battle was tougher. We actually had a discussion on the stream. Some people were like, "Well, do you like it when you get to the end and the final boss isn't that hard?" Not that this one was not that hard. This was hard enough. And my feeling on that, I'm kind of curious where you end up. Is I actually don't mind if the final boss is easier than whatever previous peak I've hit, because I feel like in a narrative game, I should say, and obviously like a progressive puzzle game, that wouldn't make any sense at all. But specifically for a game that has a narrative and you're at basically the end point of the game, I want that to be easier.
Yeah.
So that if you've gotten there, you can finish because every time the difficulty raises, right? Every time there's a spike, if the spike's higher, you lose some people. There are people who get to that point and can't do it. RPGs, JRPGs, generally you can grind and maybe just do it by devotion rather than skill. But in general, I like to get to that point and be like, and then I just kick the boss's butt.
Yeah.
And because it feels extra triumphant. Like I did all this stuff and I got there and man, was I prepared. So that's kind of where I don't know where you are on that.
Do you remember by chance what level you were?
I want to say high 40s.
Yeah, I was like high 50s.
Oh, wow.
And I'm not sure why. I mean, like we talked about in pre-show, or whenever we talked about that, I was maybe 10 more hours than you, or 8 more, or 6.
Yeah.
I don't know why the difference would be there, but and I don't know how much the level.
A lot more wandering and grinding early on.
Yeah, I went some extra places for sure. Yeah, so it could have given me a head start.
It's possible that just carried through.
Yeah. I don't. Yeah, I agree with you. I think I feel like this boss difficulty was about perfect for what I would want. Because there were so many phases, or like not even phases, like states,
Yeah.
without clear checkpointing. I don't know where, if I would have failed, I don't know where they would have checkpointed me. But I always dread those moments because
Yeah.
I didn't want to go all the way back, So, so I thought this was fine.
So you went through the Black Omen as well, though?
I did, yes. Yeah. And I actually accidentally, I thought for some reason the Black Omen was just going to be another side dungeon. By the way, I wanted to mention really quick that jogged my memory. The Sunstone, or where we got the Moonstone, was called like the Sun Temple or Shrine or something. I thought that was a cool thing to find in the future because that building was from 12,000. It was from the Age of Antiquity, right? Because it's the same art set as
I think you're right. Yeah,
as the Black Omen or whatever it's called, and of the Ocean Temple. You know what I mean? So it's like there's this connotation.
I think that's where I went to it, though.
What do you mean?
There might be multiple periods you can go to it.
Oh, huh. I scoured around. I don't think so. I think there's sort of like an implied the oceans have raised and lowered over time, in different ages because of like the Ice Age, and I don't know. This is how I thought about it. Maybe I'm wrong, but I feel like some of the islands were existing. Because
I don't specifically remember, so I'm
anyway.
It could entirely be. I do not particularly remember. It might have been there. Yeah,
it was a small detail that I thought was kind of cool that they kind of played with that. But anyway, and I mentioned it only because the art set is very specifically from the Queen's Palace. You know what I mean?
Yes.
So, so I thought it was just going to be a regular dungeon. So when I got to the end and she's like, okay, well, we're going to go see Lavos now. I was like, oh, wow. Okay. I guess this is the end. Because I had anticipated that I would have to use the time travel to get to, the cataclysm. So, but it was,
so as it turns out, if you go to 1999, it's easier. I gather you don't have to fight through all the stages.
Well, when I went early the first time that I mentioned this,
you did have to fight through all the stages.
Well, the early stages. I didn't get to the ending stages, but I can.
Oh, okay.
Imagine, but like how it goes, it cycles through each of the bosses from the
right.
Game. That was all there, but maybe the stages afterwards were not there. So it's
okay.
Here. But then when I was reading up on the different endings, it says the most difficult ending is the one where you go right away, because you only have who you have.
Right.
But anyway, yeah. So so it was just so funny how they kept like peeling the onion layer, because you fight him in that big form, you go inside of him, which I thought was cool, and now you're kind of inside this cave kind of thing, and then you see. It turns out, and this was reinforcing your theme you mentioned earlier about sort of the Gaia theme, right? Where Lavos was just collecting DNA from everybody and kind of was going to restart evolution or some such stuff. And so there's that big sort of alien that you fight that looks like an alien from the movie a little bit, like a big version of that with the two arms and stuff. And then after that, you kind of go into a time warp sort of state, and you're fighting a spaceman. This alien in a spacesuit, as far as I could tell, with some two floating things. And so
with the two floating things, yeah.
So that was, it was kind of, my vague memory of Final Fantasy IX was very much like they're just going to go places with the ending boss.
Yep.
That's just
you should see Persona 5, my friend.
Oh, really? Yeah. And in fact, Kingdom Hearts did the same thing too. So
yes, exactly. They did. Yeah,
yes.
That's the way it is. You get to the end of a JRPG, who knows what you're gonna face? But, they're gonna pull out the stops.
But it's space. I mean, I love the sci-fi aspect of it. That's one thing I've appreciated about the game in general, is that even up until the very end, science fiction is still an element of it in the middle of this. I mean, I think the amazing thing about this game, kind of you explaining Earthbound to me kind of made me intrigued about that. I might check that out someday because it seems so different. But like, there's every genre is in this game, right? I mean, every sort of like fictional genre, which I thought was cool. And then to have the ending be this alien race that's basically collecting DNA came out of nowhere, sort of, but sort of related to themes, but also kind of to have a space theme like that. And then they had a cool effect when you're fighting him in that form, with like showing scenes from the game kind of in like a time warp. Did you notice that, where the backgrounds were sort of like, they put an effect on some of the locations, like the courtroom and stuff that you'd see in the background, that gives you a sense of time travel-y kind of stuff going on. So that was neat.
Yeah, no, it's there's a lot of interesting stuff going on in that final battle. I was definitely white knuckled a little bit myself, so a lot of it was like, oh yeah, that's right, that did happen when you were saying it, like the alien and stuff. One last thing I'll leave you with in particular that you'll like this. Another thing I picked up from that book. Lavos is the name of the critter in English. In the original Japanese, it's something like Ravosuko or something like that. I don't have the book in front of me.
Mm-hmm.
That name it evokes their name for Lovecraft. For H.P. Lovecraft.
So it's their cosmic horror.
It's deliberately their cosmic horror, and yes. I don't have his name in Japanese, or the name that they call him by in Japanese, I don't have in front of me. I can't remember, but reading it was like, oh yeah, those are kind of. I mean, it starts with Rava, and there's a K sound in there as well. It's a little bit longer, but
right. Wow, that's great.
But, right. I thought you'd appreciate that.
Yep. I think I mentioned, right? Didn't I say cosmic horror?
You said cosmic horror. And when I read that in that book, I thought I should tell Tim about this, because he was spot on. All right. Good. Let's take a quick break. We'll come back with some takeaways.
Sounds good.
Welcome back from the break. Of course, we've reached the end of a series here, one that we had to stretch an extra 25%, on top of the fact that our our shows have been longer than they normally are. So this is a game that could it seems to bear endless discussion, and yet we're going to probably try to boil it down to half a dozen takeaways. So I guess I'll let you take that first, sir. I usually defer to you and let you take the first one.
Yeah, that's why I asked you about that particular one.
Okay.
So I guess the one I will start with is sort of how do I want to word it? My notes are not very elegantly put, but sort of like party member importance, I guess. And what I mean by that is sort of full integration of your party member characters throughout the sort of structure and themes of the game, which we talked a lot about in this one. And it really comes to fruition mostly in the Faded Hour section, but it does happen throughout the whole game. And that comes in the form of, who you have with you and what they say about the surroundings. It comes in the form of all these side quests that you do. And I think I mentioned it, or one of us mentioned it early in the series, where, there's very, very sort of like beloved games like, say, Mass Effect II, right? Where today people kind of talk about the loyalty missions in those for all of your party members. And, Chrono Trigger wasn't the first probably to really give you this much depth. Maybe it was one of the first, though. And I can just see the way that they handle the party members, especially with the fluidity that you can switch between them, which I think is a nice bonus in this particular game. But there's sort of a meaningfulness to, you know, they're you mentioned in Chrono Cross, they maybe switch this up in a negative direction as far as how many characters you get, but I actually think is a good thing in this game that you don't get that many. So you really can fool with them a little bit more, and they can go more deeply into each of their backstories. And even in the world structure, right, that for the most part, each of your party members you get from one of the eras that you can time travel to, with the exception of Lucca and Marley, of course. And so there's also a meaningfulness to them in the way that you are moving through the game. So I think that, you know, if I can imagine that RPG game developers of today, you know, Chrono Trigger is one of those games that if they had played, you know, really would inform how a good party should be created and thought of and fully integrated, you know. And I think it's, I guess I had heard a little bit about that when people had always told me to play this game, but nobody really gave me the sort of lowdown on really how deeply it goes. And I was really impressed with that. And, you know, even though I primarily stayed with Glenn and Robo, so they're the most memorable to me, I still can really pretty vividly talk about each of the characters, you know, and why they existed, and why they were cool. And I think that's pretty rare.
Yeah, no, I would agree. And in fact, one of my takeaways, I think echoes this, is that it really supports experimenting with the party. We had talked about how you felt it was okay to swap in another party member because the other ones were going to kind of keep up with you. Apparently, it's 75% experience for those who weren't in a fight, so they're not completely keeping pace with you, but they're not far off. By the end of the game, you know, I mentioned I was high 40s. I know my lowest leveled character, because I had Marley throughout, and then a third character, usually Ayla. But at the end of the game, I brought Lucca in because I thought, well, I'll take on Lavos with the party who started it. You know, the party who started it will end it.
Very poetic.
And Lucca was maybe at 42 or something, so she was not as high, but not far off, and was gaining levels pretty quickly as I did that final Black Omen run. So yeah, it was. I think it's really important to fully support that that's a thing that you can do, right? I mean, I think that one of the things we've talked about, and I want to say, maybe it was like KOTOR 2 or something. I can remember a real complaint that friends of ours had, that you got to a point in that game where you had to split up the party, and you don't know when you do it that you're taking one group and you're going to do half of a mission, say, and whoever you left behind, that half is also going to do it. So you end up taking all your best characters with you, thinking, okay, I'm ready. And then you end up with all these under-leveled characters who have a very hard time completing their half of the mission. Right. And avoiding those problems at this point in the game, in development, you know, by just, hey, let's just raise all boats, so that it can really support and allow you to experiment with that, and also make it, you know, that allows them also to make it fit well with the story and allow you to do the things like having Robo swap in to take care of a forest for 400 years, or you know, the frog come in to you know, to help deal with Cyrus's ghost or what have you, right? And you know, it's really important to be able to do that, or to have Marley, you know, throw a teen fit with her father and then rescue him from court. You know, whatever it is, right? You have that opportunity, and it feels like they could be part of your party then for a while, and it's never a burden.
Yeah, it's not a punishment.
It's never, it's never a grind. It's never like, oh, I can't go on with the story because I have to get, you know, this character I just brought in to a point where they won't die, which is always frustrating, and not a fun part of a JRPG, if it supports it, or any RPG. I think it's more common to see in JRPGs where you kind of make up a party composition. Western RPGs that are party based, often it's like, oh, you have your party, the whole party's there. But that has a separate issue of sometimes bogging down tactical combat in particular. Anyway, as an aside, I guess. But yeah, I thought, it's one thing to write this great story which involves all these characters, but if you don't fully support that systemically to make it a possible thing to do, you're only fighting half the battle. And here I thought it was really important that they addressed that other half, and made it no burden at all to swap out a character. There's a button dedicated to it as well, which I didn't find out for a long time, but there's a button dedicated to it. And all that's just great and really important to support that pillar for them, I think.
Yeah. Yep. That was good. So that was your first?
That was my first, yeah.
So I guess the next one I will hit, kind of combining two, they're really the same thing, I guess. Sort of the variable outcomes and permutations of the game, which definitely relates to the endings, which we talked about earlier, but just also just that kind of variable outcomes, both in order of operations that you can do them in and the result of them depending on what order you've done them in. The flow chart that we talk about on the podcast a lot, the flow chart for this game sounds crazy to me. And there's just, every time we do an episode, feel like we uncover even more little things and big things that could have happened. We talked about kind of most of the big ones. But the embracing of this, much more than, my memory of Final Fantasy IX had maybe a little bit of this. And then Kingdom Hearts didn't really have any of this kind of stuff, So I don't have a good deep bench for similarities in JRPGs to draw from. But I was definitely impressed with how much they embraced this as I feel like a core thing that they wanted to go after. And they just kind of had fun peppering these things through. One example that I forgot to mention earlier in the episode to ask you about, did you do anything additional with the jerky? Did you find an additional thing to do with it?
Was there something with the cook? So
it's close. There's a thing with the king. So before you do the rainbow shell, if you go with Marley to 1000 during
maybe this is
hour,
what happened to the jerky I bought. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so you can go and the king is kind of pissed off at Marley because she's been gallivanting around or whatever, and
yes,
she's trying to gain back his love, and they talk about the mother dying and all this kind of stuff. And I hadn't done the rainbow shell yet. And then for whatever reason, it comes up, the Chancellor, who we ultimately find out is not the Chancellor, which you already know because of the tropes from 600, says, oh yeah, he loves jerky. It's his favorite food right now. You should go and find. And I was like, well, I know where to find some jerky. And I was like, well, it's probably the Chancellor's probably leading me astray. So if you go and get the jerky, the same jerky you give to the lady, and you give it to him, the king's like, why'd you give me this jerky? Now I hate you even more because I hate jerky.
Right.
I don't want the jerky. And so I thought that was going to be somehow related to sort of her character quest, because it was like gaining, the confidence back from her father. And I hadn't done the rainbow shell stuff because I didn't know that was going to relate to Marley stuff at all. And so I thought it was like the beginning, and then it just dead ends because he gets pissed that you gave him the jerky. So
right. Yeah.
But I bring it up with this point because of the variable outcomes, right? This is just this little thing that is sort of inconsequential as far as I can tell, but it adds to the Chancellor being a jerk, right? It gives another purpose to this random object that has this other real purpose. You know what I mean? And then it adds a little bit, it actually added some nice dialogue between Marley and the king, back and forth. You get a little bit of information about the mother. And so, just that kind of stuff is peppered throughout the game. And so, unless this was one of their pillars that they really were trying to fool with, they wouldn't have done this kind of stuff, because that's there's some expense there, right? And extra work that really pays off, I think, in this case, but it's not typical. So.
Yeah, no, that's well said. Yeah, I had forgotten that actually is what happened with my original jerky that I bought.
Yeah,
I was like, I must have given that away, but now I remember because that was something I did last week for the last episode, and I'd totally forgotten about it. But yeah, that all goes on. That's really funny. Mine, I would say, is sort of defying story expectations, or what we'll normally call tropes.
Yeah.
One of the things I really loved about this game, and it's actually something we'll address a bit in a letter, so I won't go into too much detail, but I love the fact that you get to the middle of the game and the hero dies. Or the expected hero dies.
Yeah.
We actually have maybe 2 letters on this, because there is also an argument made that the real hero of this story is someone else and not Crono. So we'll read that in the feedback. So that's a couple tantalizing tidbits to look forward to. But Crono also need never come back.
That's the
game
biggie.
does not require him.
Dying is one thing, but then allowing you to take him out of your party is a whole different thing.
Yeah, or never to do the time egg, because you could just go fight Lavos.
Oh, really? Oh, yeah, I guess you could, right? You don't have to bring him back.
You don't have to bring him back. You've got the ship. We both did, because that's what we're used to. But that is shocking, frankly.
That's huge.
I think we can talk more about the implications of that with the 2 letters we're going to get in the feedback section. But I do really think that is emblematic of the sorts of things that it turns on its head. I think there are other things too, and this is actually a topic we didn't talk about, but I do think the female characters in particular in this game are quite good. Ayla is the dominant, she's the chief, she's in charge. And that's not an expectation. She's a strong female character, however she's clad. She is Kino is only in charge when she's not around. Marley is a tomboy, kind of a trope. She's still also the princess, and she still has this strong relationship with her father that we talked about. The nerd is actually this young woman, Lucca, who maybe is more interested in robots. And we already talked about how there might be that might be kind of her children. But I don't know. There's a lot to love here, as far as kind of turning your expectations of this kind of story on its head. When it got to the basically what felt like the climactic moment of the game, and the game just kept going without its hero, I was genuinely surprised, floored, really, of like that. That in particular really just, and then supporting that besides with him not being necessary to the rest of the story is all pretty cool. So I would say that's my big takeaway.
Well, I think another good example for me, not on as big of a scale, but the whole Glenn stuff, right?
Right. Another good. Yeah, where the hero is this frog
Cyrus.
Must be Cyrus. Yeah. Right. Yes. Yeah. For sure.
Just like this squire or something, or best friend or something, So that being a good character arc. I mean, each of their character arcs is interesting, for sure. I think just because I want to mention, I think I agree with you on the female characters. I think there's still a little sex appeal that they throw in there that I think was unnecessary, but and of the time for sure, but that's no kind of excuse as well. But
the characters are deeper than just that, which I think is normally the problem with that.
Yes, for sure.
The characters are a lot more than just their sex appeal, and Ayla is probably the strongest example of that. I mean, Marley's kind of an excitable, young blonde woman, I guess. But she's not dressed particularly scantily or anything like that. The other thing actually about Lucca is that her story expectation based on that scene with her mother would be that she would hate technology. but she actually turns that around and it becomes the motivating thing for her that she became the person she was because she wanted to be able to be proficient with technology, so nothing like that could happen again. How that doesn't change her when she changes time and her mom's okay is maybe more part of my third part. So we'll talk about that in a sec. Do you have another takeaway?
Yeah, one that is kind of, I guess, a little bit sort of intertwined with all of these maybe, but what I have it down as is world structure combined with the theme really well. And what I mean by that is obviously just the time travel, right? And it's not just like time travel is the version that they chose to go after. It doesn't have to be this pillar doesn't just work if you have time, only if you have time travel. What I mean by that is just the way that you navigate, especially in the Fated Hour, but the way that, but even before it's even when it's linear, right? You're still time traveling, and you get this sense that you're visiting these continents at the same time, or at different times, but in the same location in certain cases, right? So you get this sense of connectivity. And then with the Fated Hour, you see the structure come full bore even more clearly. And I think that the way that they have designed both world design and level design, that's a very difficult thing to do, to give the player that much flexibility, but have it feel like a consistently well thought through sort of flow. Do you know what I mean? So, so the way that, the obvious example using the time travel theme is, say, like maybe Ozzy's Castle, or something where you go. Oh no, actually, yeah, Ozzy's Castle is a good example because that's also the location where Medina is, right, in the future. And so you see these very clear correlations between the way that the world is built and what you end up being able to do to manipulate the world. And I thought that as a sort of like world design and level design perspective was really cool and really well thought through. And I can only imagine very, very difficult, to get it right. And I never felt like, with the exception of maybe finding some, and, not knowing that there was a map, that's a whole nother thing. But other than a couple of those little islands, like you kind of had a good sense of spatial awareness and flow about how the world worked. And I still think there's something to my theory about sort of the way that the water level rose and fell over the different eras. And so that kind of changed, obviously, the topography, but generally the continents were there. They might have been under the water, but everything was essentially represented. And I think that was definitely one of their goals. Time travel or not, just kind of the way the structure was abstractly was very good.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Well said. Mine actually also involves time travel. And mine is, I'm glad they don't worry too much about things like paradoxes.
Yeah.
I actually think that's one of those things because, we talked about it. I was mentioning Lucca and her saving her mother. Well, you would presume that because she saved her mother, she didn't see her mother, become physically disabled as a result of her dad's machinery, and therefore didn't feel the need to be right to master. There is a note in there that sort of says, well, we were lucky, but I want to be, I want to be good at science. So this, something like that doesn't happen again. So there was sort of a, either way you got something like that. So it was an important moment in her life either way. But, another case would be Marley and Lean. Lean is killed, and so Marley never exists. But if Marley never came back, then Lean presumably still would have been sought after because Marley exists, right? There's a huge paradox there. We kind of glanced over it in the whatever that would have been the first episode. Mm-hmm. But those sorts of things are kind of all over. Or might be all over. Those are two big ones. And they just kind of go with like your mental, how you would like it to work. They don't try to find some way to justify all of this. There's no they just sort of take a pop psychology, like, wouldn't it be cool, wish fulfillment way of dealing with time? And I think that is the perfect choice. Because although I think good games can be made out of more detailed thinking about or more complex thinking about time, I don't think this was the game to do that, because I think they would have had to sacrifice some other goals. So I do really like that they made that choice to not make the time travel a device, but not a super well thought
not to be
device.
A slave to it.
Yeah, to just be like, yeah, wouldn't it be great if you could go, none of this like going back and killing your grandfather, therefore you couldn't type, issues. Just straight up, we can do whatever, and it'll all make sense to us because as the player we have a continuity and we can see what happened and what changed. And I think that's a good choice. So
yeah, agreed.
Do you have any others, or was that your
no, those are the main ones.
Okay. Yeah, I think there's probably a lot more we could say about this game, and lack of randomness in the battles I think is really good. I think there's a lot of strengths, but I think those are the big ones for me that I would, when you're making a story like this, even the time travel stuff I think is it's thought through. It's so important to the game, and especially that final chapter or whatever that I really like that. So.
Yeah,
cool.
Pretty amazing game.
I'm pretty
convinced.
fantastic. Yeah,
I think I came in a little bit.
I'm putting you down the road, bit by bit, down the JRPG road. You're talking now like maybe I should play Earthbound, and I'm like, yes, yes, Tim, embrace it.
Yeah, I definitely came in with my usual JRPG skepticism, and I think, like I had said, so many friends and colleagues and stuff had suggested this one for so many years, like literally like 20 years. People have been telling me about this. And so I don't know what weird version in my head I had made up that it was going to be, and I don't have a lot of sort of basis of comparison like you do. So it's hard in that regard as well. But ultimately, even though I came in skeptical, it with every session, it won me over more and more, despite some of my frustration with some of that structure stuff we talked about. I think it all kind of like made up for that by the end. And so, I mean, I started, as soon as I got the ability, I did start a New Game Plus right away just to see what it was going to do, there was a side of me, I was like, I want to just experiment and see what happens.
What else can I do? Yeah.
So now that I know so much, about the game, that's one of the advantages of New Game Plus. So I'm sure I won't, but it was neat to have it there and to see those new portals, I think that are only in my version, open up and want to get to them to see that stuff. So, yeah.
Yeah. Super cool. I want to throw one more thing at you before we go to the emails, and that is this from a reverent Q, Nolan Felter, who comes to my streams. Balthazar, Gaspar, and Melchior. You referenced them as Shakespearean names, but the more important tie, and I did not know this, those are the traditional names of the three wise men in the Bible.
Oh, okay.
From the New Testament, that go to the birth.
Yeah, sure. Okay.
And what are those three wise men known as?
The
gift of the
Magi?
Yeah. What's the plural? What's Magi the plural
Magus?
of? How about that?
So Magus is Jesus?
I don't know. I think it's an interesting echo, though. Yeah. I mean, they're from the same time.
What do you know or remember what their names were in Japanese? What they translated to? Because again, that's a Western.
Oh, yeah. I don't know. I don't know that was in the book. Ozzy, Flea, and Slash were in the book, and they had weird Toriyama names. So one of the things apparently Toriyama likes to do, and I haven't watched Dragon Ball Z, so I don't know this stuff, but he likes to name characters after English condiments. So Aussie, Flea, and Slash are vinegar or vinegar. Soyazu, I think, something like that, but it's like soy sauce, and mayonnaise in the Japanese.
That's so
are
much
those three
better.
characters.
Oh, it's so much better. Why didn't
I'm not
translate that over?
Well, he didn't want to translate them as vinegar, and he couldn't have fit the names, first of all, because of cart limitations, because of character stuff we've talked about. So that was one reason. But yeah, it was weird to pick those, and that's been the names that stuck. That was something that they could have retranslated, but they did not.
Yeah, how funny.
I'm not sure mayonnaise would have been very threatening as an enemy. So yeah. But as far as the Magi, I don't think that came up. In the book. I don't remember that being mentioned, so can't tell you. But yeah, let's move to the takeaways. We've got, or rather to the feedback. We've got quite a number of emails. We might as well do them all. Why not? Boy. And they're all long. They don't all go to discussion, but they are all on the longer side. You have the first one. These were sent to devgameclub@gmail.com. And of course, you have the first one from Warren Linham Church with something of a combative email, I'll say.
Okay, Chrono Trigger from Warren Linham Church. Putting in this email before I hear any episodes. Probably this won't make sense until the last episode in the series. I've played the game many, many times, and the combat design is bad? ? The only non-fight item option are techs, which limited to pools of 99. The higher level ones, I think, cost 20, which means you get 4 turns with them max before having to use an item to restore mana or whatever it is called. I don't know if I parsed that. There's an accessory item.
Yeah, I should have cleaned up the grammar a little bit. It is a little messy.
No, that's okay. There's an accessory item that can cut mana cost by 75% and is farmable it is, without doing New Game Plus. No other accessory option even comes close to matching this. A contemporary comparison for me was Final Fantasy 3/6, which will let you have 2 accessories, which will let you come up with many ridiculous combinations instead of one obvious one. I did not know that was farmable. I did use that accessory myself quite a bit. Not only are you incentivized to use that accessory for the power, it's also the most convenient way to vary up what you do in combat without having to break the flow to use an item. To be honest, I think games today would solve this with cooldowns and regenerating resources. Still like the game, and maybe that's all fine because that's not the main reason to play the game. Certainly, I did plenty. Warren Linham Church. To be honest,
so I'm gonna contradict. I actually didn't use that item.
I used it for
75%.
Yeah.
No. Once I found it, I was like, I don't know. I think it's more important for me to, I don't know, whatever, do more damage, or something. I don't remember what character. I probably would have put it on Marley, I guess, or maybe Crono, because he has that luminaire.
I just used magic so much, but for like halfway through the game.
See, I really didn't. I guess is the difference that I mostly relied on Chrono's. Crono and Ayla doing a lot of damage with their normal attacks. I mean, Chrono's attack was doing something like 1,500 damage, by the time I got to the end. I was just like mowing through Black Omen. I was like, it might take a couple turns or whatever, but it was fine. And then I just heal up in between using Marley. So it's funny that he's like, there's just one dominant strategy. I'm like, well, I didn't need it, never used it. And then I did use a fair number of like, elixirs and mega elixirs in the final fight with Lavos, but that was the only time I really had to. So I did not have I didn't find that to be a problem for me anyway.
Yeah, I mean, late game you have so many mana points that I think it's probably less useful and less needed, but I think I used it but I didn't realize it was farmable, so I only had it on one character. There's also a 50% one that I used for most of the game too on a second character, but those are the only two I had. But I used that triple because I had those three guys.
Right.
So I had that triple check the whole time, and that takes quite a bit of mana. So I think I put that on whoever was using the most mana, so I could use that thing all the time, even though it's technically a tech. It's kind of just an attack, but it still uses mana. So, but yeah, I mean, to his first point though, I didn't bring it up, but in any closing thoughts as a negative or anything, but I didn't feel that good about the combat throughout the game. I mean, it just felt pretty kind of basic-y, I don't think I ever really liked the active time battle. I'm kind of bummed to hear, I think in an earlier episode, somebody mentioned that like all of the 2D Final Fantasy games have active time battle. So I'm kind of bummed to hear that. Yeah, from this generation, because I can see how somebody would come up with that design based on trying to evolve or iterate on maybe a turn-based system from the past, but it feels a little band-aidy to me. And I was constantly just, even with wait mode on, it doesn't really fully wait all the time. In certain circumstances, things are still
to be in the
menus. No, I know. Even when you're in the menus, though, sometimes if the enemy's already triggered certain things that take a long time, but it's not clear that they had already started. So it's just squishy, it's not, and I don't like squishy systems like that. So,
I can't really argue that. I mean, for me, the focus of the game, as he basically closed with, is like, for me, it was not the combat. Like, the combat was the thing I was doing to get to the next story reward, really, more than anything else.
But so you do so much combat though, like
true.
I'll never give anybody a
but
pass
I do like, contrary wise though, I do like that there's a lot of bosses and things, or even just enemies where there's a puzzle to the combat, which I think is strong. So I think that balances it. It's like, well, the combat's pretty simple. There's not, there's a couple status effects, but they're all healed by one thing, or whatever. I mean, we talked about stuff like that. But for me, it's like, well, the fodder is just fodder. You kind of mow through that. And then the more interesting stuff has some little puzzle to unlock. Now, you brute forced a lot of that stuff, but for the most part, I figured out the puzzles, and worked them out. And it supports both of those too. So it's also fine to me. Not its strength, but to me, not a huge detriment either. Well, for me also, I was streaming and like I'd be in combat and I'd be just like hitting A, repetitively with my right hand while I caught up on chat. So it was also perfectly fine for that.
I mean, that's a little different too. I just am not, time is the resource, right? No pun intended there when I'm playing a game. And that really has always been the case for me, even when I wasn't an adult. So like if I'm spending time doing something like combat this much, I want it to also be engaging in a certain way. And I think it's very telling for me in my playthrough. I would say for at least the last half, maybe more of the game, I was very often, most of the time, using auto battle. I would just turn on.
Oh, right, which I didn't have.
And it would just play, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because I didn't need to really think about it. And I think if you're to the point where you're doing auto battle most of the time, then anyway, but we're talking this to death. So
well, and that's why you need to play Final Fantasy 13-2. Just saying.
Okay.
I have one here from Patrick Holloman, who we've heard from before. I linked his book in a previous episode. If I think to, I will do it again. The subject is looking back at the structure of Chrono Trigger. Hey, Brett and Tim, I'm still greatly enjoying the Chrono Trigger episodes. Seeing you guys enjoy all the well-known and well-loved surprises week by week has brought back many of the feelings that I had about the game when I played it decades ago. Since you're about to finish the game, I wanted to write back about the structural ideas that I mentioned in my previous email. The thesis of my book was that you can view Chrono Trigger as two separate games. The first game, which includes everything up through the escape from the Blackbird, is a tragedy. During this, quote, game, the player is on a linear, guided tour of history in which the actions of the characters have no meaningful effect. Consider the results of each quest. In the first quest, the player rescues Queen lean from Yakra, but this is something that Frog did in the original timeline. In the second trip to 600 AD, the player defeats Magus, but in the original timeline, Lavos killed Magus. In 65 million BC, the player defeats Azala and the Reptites, but in the original timeline, Lavos' crash landing destroyed them. And in 12,000 BC, the player is present when Lavos destroys the Kingdom of Zeal, but they can't do anything to meaningfully alter that history. Of course, a tragedy usually requires that a tragic hero, propelled by his tragic flaw toward his inevitable doom. Crono fills that role in a way that is idiosyncratic to video games. Crono has only one real character attribute. He's an RPG hero, destined to face a legendary monster. But because he can't defeat that monster, at least the first time, this attribute becomes his tragic flaw and leads to his death. After Crono dies, a second game begins, which is a comedy in the classical sense of a story with a relatively happy ending. This game is the one that players thought they were playing originally. During this game, the player can complete quests in any order, use time travel to change history in a meaningful way, and achieve a happy ending. The designers were clearly aware of this dichotomy. After the quest to revive Fiona's forest, Robo reflects on what they all saw in the first half of the game. He surmises that the planet itself was giving them a guided tour of times and places where Lavos intervened in history and had a profoundly negative impact. At any rate, I appreciate all the insights you guys have given us about Chrono Trigger 2. It's always fun to see someone play through it the first time and have their expectations subverted. Cheers, Patrick. So there you have it.
Yeah. Well said. He definitely knows his stuff.
He definitely knows his stuff. He's definitely played this game a lot.
Very Shakespearean. I mean, it's even so much more appropriate that the original translation embraced that. Do you know? I'm sure. I mean, I'm asking you all these questions from the book, expecting the book to have all the answers, but
some of them are.
Did Glenn's translation in Japanese also have a sort of lyrical sense to it, or
no? He just thought that would be good for the character.
That's crazy.
And in fact, that's why it's changed back. Because there's actually there are short interviews or a number of short questions posed to each of the translators in the book. And he specifically asks about to both of them. And now I'm forgetting their name. Is it Shepard and Woolsey? Anyway, the original translator thought that it made a lot of sense to distinguish that character, even though none of the characters in that era talk that way. And the subsequent translator put it back so that they're all similar for internal consistency reasons. And I think both are justifiable. I think it's possible to choose either of those based on sort of what your goals are for the translation. And which is a whole separate question. And something we talked a lot about. Localization, in connection with this game, and generally with a question from Gothic Chocobo an episode or two ago. So yeah, I mean, I think that they definitely each came at that and had reasons why they did it. And I think, it's interesting because the second translation had a lot more space because that was just relaxed. That he could basically translate everything, and use as much language as he wanted in the subsequent translation. But super interesting stuff.
Yeah. Neat. Yeah, no, it's great to hear sort of a scholar behind a game like this to really break it down that way and think deeper than we could even get, in doing it over a month or so. So yeah, it's great. That's one of my favorite things about the cast is to have the fans of the game who have really, especially for ones that we've played that we're playing for the first time, I definitely have those games in my background that I can talk that deeply about, but there's no way we could do that for every game. So it's great to have them come out. Please keep sending those kinds of emails to us, especially for ones that we don't know, games that we don't know well. Okay,
all right, you have
go to the
one
next one?
From Rick.
Okay, subject is don't finish Chrono Trigger too close to recording. Darn it. I did the opposite of that today.
Well, actually, you did New Game Plus a little bit more than I did, so that's fine.
I did. Yeah, I just jumped in to kind of run around town to see what would happen. From Rick Butler. I hope you guys are able to finish Chrono Trigger and leave yourselves some time to explore New Game Plus. If not, at least check out the various wiki guides on the endings. It's a neat little way to get extra content out of the game that's sold for as much as $80 on release. I'm so excited you made it around to this game. I actually just picked it up on mobile while listening to your Civ series. I've never beaten the game, though have completed everything but the final dungeon on 2 other versions, the SNES and the Wii release, as well as completed the sequel several times. Maybe listening to the pod will help me make that final push. It's one of those games where I just don't want it to end. Keep up the great work. It's been wonderful listening to the pod for over 200 episodes. Can't thank you enough. Thank you for listening, Rick. Push through for sure. You clearly love it. And I feel like the good thing about this game, even though it does end, is it seems like it's so rich and deep and multifaceted that you were talking about Wasteland 2 and stuff as far as like there's no way you're going to replay that. This is a game that clearly people love to replay, deserves to be replayed, and is built to be replayed, I think, because of all the different ways you can kind of enjoy it. So I hope you get around to it. But New Game Plus, there is something to be said about like finishing a game and then especially for the podcast, because we kind of go so deeply and kind of try to scour that, I'm sure I could go back so efficiently, and like really like beeline my way to things and know what I want to experiment with and what I don't want to experiment with. And I can totally see this being a good game for that. So I don't think I'll get the time, but I can, the draw is there for sure.
Yeah, for sure. I have one here from James Roberts. There you go. You're right there in the subject. Final notes and a letter for Tim. He says, I want to say how great the Chrono Trigger discussion has been in each episode. From the good and the bad. Seriously, those trees on the mountain are terrible. Can you imagine doing that section on iOS with touch controls? And everything in between. It's all been a great way to pass some time while most of us are stuck at home. The only fun note I will add from the gameplay is that many of those magical chests can be upgraded. Interact with them in the year 600, but don't open them, and then go to the year 1000 in the same spot and open the chest there to get an upgraded item.
What?
Then you can go back to 600 and open that same chest in the past for the original non-upgraded item. Pretty cool, right?
That is incredible. Are you kidding me?
Yep.
I wouldn't have even thought to do that. That's why it prompts you. I was like, why would it prompt you? Because the medallion, it says
to open the chest, yeah.
The medallion has energized the chest or something like that. Do you want to open it? And I always thought, like, why wouldn't I want to open it?
There you go.
Oh my goodness,
that is New Game Plus.
Something else.
Now
no,
for
what that's not even a New Game Plus thing, right?
That's in the
That's in the regular.
But no,
game.
For you now, you got to go back.
Oh, okay, yeah, right.
Now for what I really want to talk about. I want to congratulate Tim for some of the points he made about Frog in the last episode. If my name was Wonka, I would be signing the deed to my chocolate factory to him. I believe Tim is starting to discover Chrono Trigger's best-kept secret, something that only the truly worthy discover, that Frog is secretly the main character of the game. He has the most fleshed-out backstory. He goes through more character growth than any other character in the game. You begin the game as Crono, but what you don't realize until much later is that you are starting the game as Frog's next Cyrus, his next swordsman companion on a grand adventure. Crono is his second chance to learn that vengeance against mages cannot truly heal him or bring back Cyrus or erase that pain. Through this knowledge, Frog learns what is truly important, is to move forward and fight for the future. Because of this, he is not only able to save Crono, but also Magus and himself. Frog is the true hero of the game. Well, if you squint really hard anyway, and make a few leaps in logic. Also, his theme song is cooler than Chrono's. I certainly didn't see Crono stepping up to cut that mountain in half. And don't worry about not killing mages. You don't get to see Frog back in his Glen form until the final cutscenes of the game anyway, and that's not worth stripping him of his character growth, in my opinion. I've had a lot of fun listening the last several weeks, and I'm looking forward to whatever you play next. Until next time, James Roberts. So there you go. The secret sauce, the secret chocolate sauce on the sundae of Chrono Trigger is that Frog is the main character.
I'm with him. Like I said, when Crono died and the whole time egg thing, like because he was my number 2, as soon as that happened, I elevated him into my number 1 slot.
Yeah,
and
I know.
Then added Lucca in, so I think
I took away his hero medal instead. So
yeah, right. So of course you did. What a jerk. Oh, and then a small thing that I forgot to mention, that if you did you give him Masamune as
Masamune gets powered up.
Right.
If
the end. Although he wasn't in your party, so you didn't see this. But if you are using Masamune at during the Lavos fight, and you use it against Lavos during the Magus phase, when he's embodying,
right. Mm-hmm.
Masamune lowers his defense just by hitting him.
Nice.
So there's this, it's just stuff like that. Like, this is a small little thing on one small phase of a boss, that if you have Frog and he has Masamune, you have this, like, you can cakewalk that because he's using the right sword for. So now I'm thinking maybe every phase has something like that, but so maybe that's a little bit of the puzzle in that case. But the thing is, you can't change your party members mid boss battle, so that's not really the case. But anyway, I think Frog is amazing. As a small note too, in the anime ending of the game, ending cinematic, during the section which I mentioned where they show Glenn in his human form, it is a very glorious sort of like scene, because he's in court with the king and the queen, and the king is knighting him in front of the whole city, and like they put all the soldiers put their swords up, in a V above him, and he walks underneath them. And it's funny too, because the way they shoot that scene, I don't think they ever show his face, but you see that he has green hair and that he's a human. So it's like very interestingly shot. And then he kind of walks off into the, down the sort of processional, and then just, off camera. So it is a very much a hero's sort of welcome, right? Like, he is the hero of 600 for sure, and everyone sort of sees him as that. And he's basically just a green-haired Crono at that point. He's, a human man. So, or he's a man more than a boy. So I guess a little different, but I love it. I love it. He is the hero he's the star in my heart.
Oh, I know.
Okay. Next.
Yeah.
We're still going here.
We're going to go. We're going to finish him.
I hope you're up for a really long one now. I think there's no better game than to do a long one on, though. Okay, comment on silent JRPG protagonists from John Webb. Hi, Brett and Tim. I'm halfway through your Chrono Trigger playthrough, and I have enjoyed listening to how different your experiences were from mine. I was especially surprised to hear about the prison escape sequence, and how both of you discovered different things about what could happen with knocking out guards and such. I wanted to write in regarding the comments both of you made on silent JRPG protagonists in episode 204. It was remarked that Final Fantasy Fantasy VII, is beloved because it begins in the middle of someone's story, and this makes all the sense in the world to me. I wanted to give you some context on that through a thought in the form of an example that I love, of a tale that begins at the beginning of a silent protagonist story. Breath of Fire 3 featured Ryu, never sure how to pronounce that.
Ryu, I think.
Ryu, who begins the game as a child, seemingly about 6 or 7 years old. He grows up over the course of the game, but it is more nuanced than a fade. But it is more nuanced than a fade out, and new sprites, like many games of that era did. It cough wild arms a cough. If you attack an enemy with Ryu at the beginning of the game, he hides his face with one hand and is anxious, and he anxiously waves his sword blindly at the enemy with the other hand. At a certain point in the plot, his animation changes to a full two-handed child-size swing, which gives a strong impression that he has come to grips with the violence in his life in some way. This is never commented on by the game, as far as I can tell, although a small detail. This reason alone is why BOF3 Ryu is one of my favorite protagonists in JRPGs, and certainly one of the most enjoyable silent ones. Bonus fact, BOF3 Ryu has got to be in some sort of top 10 list for instances of nudity in JRPGs, along with Faye from Xenogears, I suspect. Bonus fact, Lucca made a guest appearance in Xenogears, ! As I recall, she was in the first village and dropped some tutorial knowledge or minor exposition for the player. Very much enjoying the playthrough of the podcast in general. Cheers. Wow. Yeah. Some deep cuts there.
Yeah, I have not played a Breath of Fire series or Xenogears for that matter. Xenogears, I think, was hard to find, actually. If you didn't get it when it first came out, it was short run in the United States. It's appropriate, though, because that's a robot game. So it's appropriate that Lucca should show up there. It's a Square game. And so they had the ability to just drop her in. PlayStation 1 era, I believe. I actually bought that one for Kermsey. And I don't know that he ever finished it, but I got it for him one year. He's like, that's the one I meant to play. So I'll have to give him a hard time.
Yeah, I mean,
didn't play it.
There's great advantages to silent protagonists. We were probably giving him a harder time last episode or whenever that was than we should have, because they have a good place in certain stories, especially when in video games when you're sort of trying to personify, the player in some way. And I think that with the whole death thing we talked about, maybe they're really kind of trying to subvert that. And that was another goal they had. So making him more of a character could have made that less effective in a way, if it seemed like his destiny was more unique as a character, versus just the silent protagonist. So I get you. I mean, it's they're definitely that Ryu example is a really cool example of leveraging silent protagonists in interesting ways. For me though, it's a very specific sort of obvious and silly example, which we probably talked about when we played Half-Life 1. Gordon Freeman has always been my favorite example of that, right? It's very it's very theatrical in that, you learn everything about your character based on what others say about you, versus what you say, and you fill in the blank yourself as the player. So that's definitely cool. All right, you got the next one?
I do. It's the subject is simply Chrono Trigger. It's from Walker Farrell. I think I actually changed that subject because I think it was a reply to a chain. He says, it's been fun to hear the stories from other emailers about renting Chrono Trigger from their local video store repeatedly. My video store didn't have a copy, so I played it at a friend's house on an emulator, ZSNES or SNES 9X maybe. It ran at about 5 frames per second and had no sound. We didn't get super far, but later I did manage to find a used copy at, if I recall the name of the store correctly, Funkoland. I devoured it with glee, but at the very moment I aimed the epoch at the Black Omen, my younger brother and a friend of his were wrestling on the living room floor, and one of them smashed bodily into the SNES. The screen went glitchy and static. I held my breath and reset the console, and my save files were gone. I eventually finished the game in college.
Holy, that's terrible.
That's the wrong timeline. Somebody ought to fix that. Now that DGC is playing it, I booted up a save file I had on the DS, which I was fairly sure was close to the end of the game. Turned out that I'd filled out every Faded Hour side quest, and the Black Omen and Lavos were all that was left. I blasted through the Black Omen with no troubles, but the final fight against Lavos was a white-knuckle battle. By halfway through it, it was obvious that I had to lean heavily on my Mega Elixir stock, since the Marley Frog dual healing tech was keeping me from blasting it with the triple tech that was my main damage source. I used all 10 megalixirs I had, and if the battle had gone 2 turns longer, I would have perished, but I barely prevailed. This game is hailed as being the originator, or at least maybe the origin of the name of the New Game Plus. Yeah, we touched on that, which has become a standard feature in JRPGs. But unlike most of them, the way it offers alternate endings is highly conducive to New Game Plus. You can access the Lavos fight within minutes of the opening scene if you're clever. I'm not really interested after having just barely beaten it. And additional possible endings are threaded through the full narrative. Most games now open up boss fights with millions of hit points on replay and not much else. It's interesting to me that the ending structure is the part that seems to have been less influential, occasional creative outliers like Nier Automata notwithstanding. Cheers, Walker. Yeah, that's a good call out, actually, Nier Automata, I should say.
Yeah.
Because that has something like 23 endings, something like that, most of which
20,
I saw.
I think it's every letter of the alphabet, right? Isn't it 26?
Yeah, it might be. I felt like there wasn't a couple at the end, so that's why. But I don't know. I don't remember. There are a lot, certainly. Yeah. Some of them I found accidentally, and they were kind of jokey ones. And I was frustrated because it ended my game.
Yeah.
Because it was like, I happened to eat something, and then it's like, you shouldn't eat that, and it gives you an ending that's the fish ending or something. But yeah, that's a good call out of a game that has multiple endings that are wild and different. That's quite a game. But yeah, most games do not do that. The New Game Plus is like, you thought that was hard? Well, take where you are and go at it again. It's sort of the Diablo style, we can just make the numbers go bigger. You get more stuff, but the challenge is there.
I didn't even talk about the extra dungeon that I did that I had in this version before New Game Plus.
Right.
It's called the Lost Sanctum. That to be honest, I didn't feel like it added too much to it. I definitely got levels from it, maybe a couple gear items, but and it was a bit of an interesting story. It was the reptites. It was basically a little dungeon area where some reptites were living that thought that the rest of the land in 65 million BC had been abandoned, like that the humans had become extinct. And so you kind of had to help them out with this tree, and it's not that good, to be honest. But it's neat that they added that stuff in. And again, in the New Game Plus, there's another one of those that I could. So that's definitely going above and beyond what a lot of games do to give you extra content.
Yeah, for sure. And yeah, I would like to see more of that. So I'm putting that call out. I don't just want a harder version of the game I just beat. I want a new lens on which to view the game I just beat for myself. So I would encourage developers out there listening, go run with it, do more. Okay, let's hit that final one from Zimmy Finger, and fully embrace our fives. This is it. We've reached the end.
Man. Okay, here we go. Subject: Chrono Trigger and Civilization. From Zimmy Finger. Hello, Tim and Brett. Hope you're doing well. I finally caught up with the podcast and have been playing along. Like you guys have mentioned, I really like how they get a lot of mileage out of enemy encounters. Things like jumping out of a cupboard or playing ball. Move my cursor. I also love that you can still move your character while there is a dialogue box on the screen. Yes, I like that too. Making talking to NPCs feel less like a chore. Lastly, I want to give a shout out to Dwarf Fortress for being a story generator. There's a story passed around the internet about an army of dwarves who try to defend against a demon. The whole army gets wiped out except for one dwarf. He is at the bottom of the cliff bleeding. When the player examined what he was doing, it turned out that the dwarf was carving an image into a rock. What was the image of? A picture of a demon and some dwarves. The demon was in a fetal position. The dwarves were laughing. What makes this game so fascinating is this isn't hard-coded into the game. Like Civ, this is a bunch of variables and functions interacting with each other to make this story happen. To put into context, the game simulates each major body organ, heart, brain, nervous system, etc., along with 120 different emotions ranging from self-pity to grim satisfaction. Sadly, I have yet to figure out how to play it. I was about to say that's what I hear a lot of people say. Anyway, been really enjoying the podcast. Thank you so much. Zimmy Finger. P.S. The second quest has forever changed not just how I look at one rock, but all rocks.
Put that one in for you. Yeah, he sent some links too about Dwarf Fortress. A couple of links probably to this particular story, and maybe to stories generally from it, because one of the links is for dfstories.com. So I will put those in the show notes. But yeah, he was kind of talking about the the sort of interaction with how you get the stories, and we had another one of those last week as well. So of a Civ story, right? With the East Asia co-prosperity sphere.
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah, I mean that's I've always heard that about Dwarf Fortress as well. Yeah, that it's very similar in that it's those clashing of variables. That specific story is amazing to me. That's just crazy. That is fully simulated. And when people talk about like our story last week, I'm forgetting who sent that. Do you remember?
I don't have the name in front of me, but I can find it while you talk.
But that fellow, he's speaking. His stories tend to be speaking kind of from on the civilization.
It's Johnny Gratan.
Yeah, that's right, Johnny.
Pockets
on the sort of Civ layer, you know what I mean? As far as like he's talking about Korea versus Japan versus China, you know what I mean? Like kind of like what each group is doing. The Dwarf Fortress story, is of a grand moment that's happening or battle, and then what one dwarf is doing. And there's times in Civ when that same thing happens, where I think even on our podcast we were probably telling stories, and there's times when you're talking about sometimes this one unit, right? Who's like this one soldier was holding off this whole, or defending, this one pikeman was defending this Constantinople for 10 turns by himself and kept leveling up, so even a unit can create those kinds of stories. And that's still amazing to me because obviously none of it's scripted. So
yeah,
thanks,
that was
Simi.
something that I think I want to say it was Marc LeBlanc had given a talk at some point. Now I'm not sure if it was him or maybe Ron Gilbert, about playing XCOM and having lost some characters. I don't remember who it was now.
I think it was Ron. I think you brought it up before. I think it was Ron Gilbert. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. They actually look similar, which is why I think I'm confused. Like I'm seeing the talk and like, who is that up there on stage? Anyway, about having lost an important member of the squad and being about to go do the final mission on Mars, and going and taking a raw recruit and saying, "Suit up, son, you're going to Mars." And it was just one of those systemic, it just happened that I'm ready to go. And unfortunately I've got seven veterans and one spot open, and I guess we got to put a character in there. So it's systems driven games, highly systemic games can really lead to those wild stories that you make into a story for yourself. What's wild about Dwarf Fortress is how much stuff that thing simulates. I have tried. That game is too obscure for me. Too obscure. It's not something I care to put in the time to make less obscure to me, but I do love that it exists. Yeah, and I'm glad they've been able to do it. They've been doing it for a long time. Mm-hmm. So I think it's a couple brothers, right? Something like that.
Yeah. They're just doing a graphic overhaul too, right? Or maybe it's already out.
I've heard that's been released. You say graphic overhaul and I say, well,
it's going from ASCII
relatively speaking. Yeah. It's going from ASCII to like colored art blocks. Anyway, well, that, sir, is our show. We have caught up on the email. We have delivered on our 5-hour runtime. We're all stuck at home, so here you get to hear more of us this week.
This isn't going to be a trend, though, people. Just
we're not doing this forever.
we're going back to around our hour if we can. So speaking of which, our next episode is...
Yeah, we're gonna hit the WoW trail again, as it were. We are gonna spend Earth Day in Azeroth.
Yes, my dreams come true.
We are going to try to hit a couple dungeons, and probably will spend some time doing that this coming weekend. So for folks who follow me on twitch.tv/BrettDuville, you can find us playing that there one of the days. I'm sure we'll fit some in. On weeknights, I'll continue playing Wasteland 2, which I actually mentioned this episode. I'm getting near to the end of that, so by the time you're hearing this, I may have already moved on to my next game, which is looking like it might be MGS4.
Yes.
Metal Gear Solid 4. Or as I like to call it, IV.
Oh, with my brain fart on Roman numerals, apparently, in this episode.
Yes.
I don't know what you mean by that.
I know. It means it's that thing you put in your arm. It's a very appropriate for a Metal Gear Solid game. So you'll either find me tracking the wastes or sneaking through enemy lines. I'm not sure which. Or you can catch up with me there playing World of Warcraft. Yeah, we've both leveled to near enough to 30, I think.
We've done about 10 levels since the last episode, so we'll just do a check-in episode. It won't be, and then we'll kind of talk about the zones we played and the dungeons probably. But
for sure. Yeah, no, I look forward to talking a little bit about Duskwood, both from a art design and a game design standpoint, because the two are far apart in my estimation. So that'll be an interesting conversation. But I guess that's about all we have. Those folks sent in their many emails to devgameclub@gmail.com. We love every email. We really appreciate having a chance to read and respond to them as part of the podcast. We also love to get reviews. We haven't had one in a long time. I'm just going to keep saying it. We'd love to have some, so throw them our way if you have a minute. And come on, you're at home. You have a minute. That's about all. So I guess you can find the podcast on the web at devgameclub.com and on Twitter at devgameclub, where you can also find my co-host at
Tim Longo Jr. with a JR at the end.
Our intro and outro music was written and performed by Kirk Hamilton and commissioned by friend of the cast, Aaron Evers. Thanks so much for joining us. We'll see you in Azeroth, and good night.
Good night.